This was a deal that Doug Armstrong had to make because you're not talking about players that are going to be fill-ins for a couple years or players who are going to get you through the retool, and then they may not be here in 3 years when you're ready to be competitive again. These players in Broberg and Holloway, 23, 22 years old, first-round picks, like I said, they're a part of this foundation moving forward. These are the players that Doug Armstrong identified and said, I want them to be part of this thing moving forward. And obviously he went to an extreme measure to get them, but it was a wonderful way to do it. He got what he wanted, and now these guys are going to be a part of it for a long time.
That was Jeremy Rutherford on with the morning show earlier today. He's going to be on with us as well later on this afternoon with Alex and T-Bone. I'm BK. Good to be back in with the boys today. Big news here in St. Louis, and it is so nice, so refreshing to have a positive story to talk about here in St. Louis for a change. Philip Broberg, no, not Roseburg, Philip Broberg and Dylan Holloway are heading to St. Louis after the Blues ended up getting these offer sheets done. The Oilers opted not to match on the contracts. Alex, normally I would give you the next minute or so. I would give you my full thoughts on the contracts and everything that this means for the Blues. I'm not doing that today. I've never seen Alex more giddy in a pre-show meeting than this morning. So I'm going to open this up for you. Alex, what was your reaction this morning when you woke up to the news, I think at 2:30, 3:30, 4:30, 5:30, and then eventually at 8:30 when it was announced the Blues are going to be able to add both Philip Broberg and Dylan Holloway?
Man, I've gone through a roller coaster of emotions because yesterday, if you missed it, BK, I was very sad.
Very sad.
Before the show, and then I spun it positively because that's just who I am. I'm a positive guy, and I got everybody convinced that both were going to be here.
You want to live longer.
Yeah, I'm trying to live longer. And look, Schilt is right now in San Diego, unlike Ollie here in St. Louis. But anyway.
Relax. That's not associated.
Last night, I kept rolling over. It was a sleepless night, BK, because I'm thinking, oh, God, come on. Tell me if these guys are going to get matched. 3:30, 4:30, 5:30. And I'm seeing Jordan Schmaltz tweet out. I'm seeing Mark Spector tweet out. Elliot Friedman tweet out. And then you got the news. And let me tell you something. This is the happiest I have been for surrounding the St. Louis Blues since the year that they lost to this Colorado Avalanche in the second round. And here's why. They're not in a retool anymore. That was my first reaction when I saw that they not only got Broberg, but they got Broberg and Holloway. Because the whole point of this retool was trying to reshuffle the deck and find guys that fit into the core and the future of this Blues team. And they were slowly finding these players through the draft. You get Dvorsky, you get Lindstein, you get Stenberg, Snuggerud. Then you see the development of Jake Neighbors and Thomas and Kyrie, and you're thinking, okay, we're starting to see a path here. But it still was viewed as a retool. Why? Because of the cap crap situation that they were in with these defensemen, and you had no future for your defense. The only guy that had excitement for you was Theo Lindstein. And then lo and behold, Doug Armstrong just throws out those cojones and says, we're going to go get our left-handed defenseman who's 23 years old, who's going to be here for the next 2 years, who profiles, as Daniel Nugent-Bowman told us, as a top four, if not a top pair defenseman in the future, and we're going to put that into our core. Why do I not believe this is a retool anymore? Because now your core is in place. Now it's about developing those guys and trying to compete. And when you've got 5 players that I believe are in their primes or right on the cusp of in their primes, those guys get you closer to the postseason while the rest of your roster is rounded out. So acquiring Philip Broberg, to me, this is the biggest move that Doug Armstrong's pulled off since they got Ryan O'Reilly.
I like that.
That seems aggressive. They got Pavel Buchnevich since then.
Man.
Pavel Buchnevich was like, cool. I mean, I was excited because I nailed it on the Ferrario 5.
Stop it.
Guys, this is a left-handed defenseman who has the potential to play with Colton Parayko. We've been asking for that since Jay Bomeister retired.
In fact, he was compared by somebody on this very radio show to Jay Bomeister.
Like who?
Oh, we'll get into that in a minute.
He didn't have it on the cut sheet.
I was like, he pointed at me, and I'm like, what? I've got all the cut stuff over here.
He thought he was fancy. He was like, in fact, we were comparing that
Rocky
the other
would have
day.
had that ready for me.
Wow.
Rocky wouldn't have had it cut.
Touche, I would have got it for him. So,
Rocky, if you could pull it out of my folder, it's in a folder, a Daily Show folder for today's date.
The reason why I find this move to be so fascinating is because of that response that Alex just had. Because objectively, the Blues overpaid. Just based on the performance that we've seen from these two individuals. They overpaid probably via draft capital, second, third round pick for these two players. And they overpaid certainly in terms of the salary for these two players. Philip Broberg is probably closer to a $2 million defenseman than a $4 million defenseman. Dylan Holloway is probably closer to a league minimum player, $1 million, than he is a $2.5 million player. And yet, I think Alex is correct about everything he said. I think it is the smart move to overpay in this scenario. What the Blues did, in my opinion, is they paid for time. They paid to remove the 3 years of development that they would otherwise have to have for somebody like a Philip Broberg. If they went into the draft next year and selected a defenseman in the top 10, we probably would not see them fully formed and developed at this point in their careers where Philip Broberg is at right now until like 2028. And so instead of waiting until then, or instead of paying $7 million on the market for somebody that profiles similarly to Broberg, who's fully formed already, or instead of going out and trading for Jacob Chikrin, where they would have had to give up even more assets and money than what they did here for Broberg, they decided, okay, this is our best chance to find a guy that profiles to be the next Jacob Chikrin. That can be somebody similar to that. We can get a Dylan Holloway in here who is a former top 15 pick, maybe profiles to be a 15 to 20 goal scorer. And so you do all of that because you remove the aspect of time from the equation. You accelerate this thing. Instead of taking another 2 to 3 years to add these important pieces to this retool, they got them right now. You don't have to continue waiting. You get this year to find out what Philip Broberg is, and that allows you the information to find out, do we need to draft another defenseman to fit into that spot, or can Broberg be the guy that we were missing? I think it's a brilliant stroke here by Doug Armstrong, man. I'm not sure that this is like, when you compare it to the best moves that Army has made, O'Reilly's up there. Shin is up there for me. Booch is up there for me. Hell, you look back and look at some of the moves that he made even earlier in his tenure. Maybe some of those would be above this. But in terms of the importance, the timeliness of them for what they meant for those respective rosters, this is about as big as you can get because of how rare it is for general managers to pull off something like this. I thought it was brilliant. I thought it was a super smart move, and I'm shocked, honestly, that it worked out as well as it did for the Blues.
I think a lot of people are because, T-Bone was in that meeting with me yesterday. I
thought for sure Broberg was being matched after their moves yesterday.
I had to seriously convince myself, okay, well, maybe Edmonton's looking at this in a different direction. And one thing I do want to note here, this deal doesn't happen. You don't have these players, specifically Broberg, if Pittsburgh doesn't trade you back that second-round draft pick. Think about that for a minute. You had to make sure that you got your second-round pick back from Pittsburgh that you traded to get rid of Kevin Hayes. Otherwise, you're not offering sheet, or you're offering sheet higher and trading away a first-round draft pick. So not just this deal itself making Doug Armstrong look ingenious, but also finding a way to get Pittsburgh to agree to send you back that second-round draft pick and take another year down the road second-round pick so that you can make this deal work.
Yeah, and I've seen some say, hey, when you look at what they did with Broberg, he's $4.5 million now. The odds of him becoming that kind of a player on this deal, pretty low. It's going to be hard for him to be a legit he has to be better than Nick Leddy to be worth this contract.
That'll be easy.
I hear you, but right now at this point in his career, it would be hard for him to become as good right now as Nick Leddy is already, right? So the odds of him living up, quote unquote, to this $4.5 million salary, pretty low. And that's why Edmonton, it's probably the smart move, honestly, not to match either of these deals. For where they're at in their life cycle as an organization, they probably shouldn't have matched. It's too much for a Broberg at this point in his career. It's probably too much for a Holloway. They now have cap flexibility. They have the draft pick assets that they can use at the deadline to be able to trade for something if they want to go get a significant move at the deadline. It's probably the smart move for them. And also for the Blues, it's the smart move. And part of why I like this so much on the Broberg side, and I'm going to focus on him because I think that's the real win here, quote unquote, for Army.
Later, Holloway.
I think Holloway is a really nice piece. I like what they added there, but Broberg is the thing that you just can't find elsewhere, dude.
Yeah.
Try to find me a 6'3" left-handed defenseman that skate the way that he can and move the puck the way that he does, and showed you the ability to win in the postseason.
And not just the postseason, the conference final and the Stanley Cup final.
That doesn't happen. You can't find these guys out there, man. And so they overpaid. They spent too much. They sent an asset out that you probably don't want to in the middle of a retool when you're sending out draft picks. I do not care. If you told me, hey, there's a 50-50 proposition that second round pick is going to cost a little more than you'd like, but becomes a top 4 defenseman, is that worth it for you? Dude, yes. Send the first 3 picks out if that's what I end up getting.
Let me read to you guys. I'm just going to go back to 2014. These were the last second-round draft picks by the Blues in the last 10 years. Ivan Barbashev, really good player, but you would have traded Ivan Barbashev for a top 4 left-handed defenseman, right? 23 years old.
You tried to trade him
for nothing.
5 years and you guys told me no.
Vince Dunn,
Yeah, of course.
Jordan Kyrou, still would.
I would not, but go ahead.
Klim Kostin, who is essentially second-round pick, 31st
Absolutely.
overall. Scott Perunovich,
Yeah.
Nikita Alexandrov.
Yeah.
Didn't have any second rounds for a couple of years. Theo Lindstein, who was just drafted, and then you just drafted this Colin Ralph. So in the last 10 years, I just listed off those.
There'd be like 3 of those that I wouldn't trade.
And like if you go even further, I don't want to go too far with it, but like William Carrier and Tommy Vanelli for the Blues traded those guys away. Dmitry Yashkin and Ty Ratty. What I'm trying to get at is a second round draft pick to a lot of Blues fans saying, oh, you're in a retool and you're trading for a guy who hasn't been proven. Part of the reason Philip Broberg has only played 81 games in the National Hockey League is because the Edmonton Oilers didn't feel he fit into their timeline that was trying to win now.
They are doing what the Cardinals do, which is,
But better.
they're actually like
Yeah,
good.
they're good.
But they
draft
are putting
correctly.
an emphasis every year on winning right now at the expense potentially of young players and their development. And that's where things get really difficult as an organization is how do we have these 2 timelines coming together in one path? And for the Blues, they don't have that concern. Man, it's all about development right now. Yeah, we'd love to see the Blues win this year, but really, it's about developing this young talent to win on the next timeline for the team. And so that's what I wanted to get to with Alex Ferrario coming up on the other side. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line to get involved in the show. The YouTube chat, youtube.com/101ESPN That is where you can go to find us. The Graveyard chat is off and running today. You got something else you wanted to add, Alex?
I just
saw
wanted to
that smirk.
I know. I just wanted to read this tweet from Grant Francis because this is just amazing to me. Grant tweeted out, imagine Doug Armstrong fleecing you so hard in a trade that he sends a pick and a prospect for emotional damage. That's essentially what took place today. They're like, hey, we know that we just screwed you guys over. So here's a 3rd round pick 4 years from now where you probably won't be here. And here's a guy that we just drafted and probably won't be in the NHL.
Yeah, who was unsigned by the Blues, by the way.
Just completely destroyed the Edmonton Oilers.
So if people don't know, in a separate deal, quote unquote,
Yeah, okay.
the Blues, for future considerations, Holloway and Broberg, again, unrelated.
Because we made you hurt so bad.
The Blues sent a 3rd round pick in 2028 and a unsigned 5th round selection from this year.
What is this, the NBA where we're trading picks 5 years
to
from
the
now?
Edmonton Oilers.
I just picture Stan Bowman picking up that phone and telling me, hey, I'm going to give you a 3rd round pick in 2028 and this kid we haven't signed. Oh, thanks, Doug.
Stan goes, screw off, Doug.
I get the sense that
Then
that
call back, I'll take
conversation went as follows. The Oilers call Army. Army says, what did you decide? And the Oilers say, we're still thinking about it. Army says, dude, just 3rd round pick 2028, and like we've got this prospect that we can't sign. You want him to?
You want to be
like,
Paul Fisher?
all right, fine, we'll make it work. And that's where it's over. All right, coming up next. The Blues now have a surplus of young wingers. What does that mean for them? How are they going to configure that? And what are Alex's reasonable expectations for the Blues this season? I'm sure they're going to be completely reasonable. We'll get into that next. Here on
Cup
101
or
ESPN.
bust.
And what we don't want to try and do is jam a square peg into a round hole. And so if the trades don't make sense, if we can't see the value of, let's say, trading for a player with multiple years on his contract, knowing that we're going to get value throughout that and he can help with the development, we're not going to do it, or we're not going to, it's age and term. And I think those go hand in hand.
Big news here in St. Louis today. That was Doug Armstrong at the end of the season. The Blues have added Philip Broberg and Dylan Holloway, the two players that they decided to send offer sheets to via the Edmonton Oilers. The Oilers declined to match those offer sheets earlier this morning. With Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Braden Kiley. Both of those sheets are worth 2 years. Philip Broberg's is about $4.5 million per season. Holloway is $2.5 million per season. Holloway, a former first-round pick at forward. Broberg is the 6'3" left-handed defenseman, Alex. They're both going to be headed here now to St. Louis. They now have a surplus of young wingers. That is one thing that I'm going to be very curious about, is how this is going to work out in 2024. How do they decide to deploy these young players? Because for this year and next, they're going to have to decide who are we keeping long-term and who is going to be a trade asset, who's going to be a guy that just, for whatever reason, doesn't work out here in St. Louis. That is likely going to happen. I don't know if it's going to be Holloway. I don't know if it's going to be Snuggerud. Maybe it's Bolduc, maybe it ends up being Snug. I don't know. I don't know who the guys will be that are here long term. But for you, how do you think they're going to try to shake this out for this season, Alex, with the young wingers?
I think this season you're going to be looking at guys that were already on the NHL roster that you thought were going to be here. They'll be in the American Hockey League. So basically, Zach Bolduc and Zach Dean, unless they just completely dominate in the training camp and preseason, I expect those guys to be playing top 6 minutes in the AHL. Same with Dalibor Dvorsky. Unless you just run away with it, you're more than likely going to be in the American Hockey League. And then when Snuggerud gets back from college, when the kids from Sweden come over, they're going to kind of slow play this thing. And what I go back to with this is Doug Armstrong, and I believe it was last year when he was asked about drafting all of these forwards, because you get Stenberg, you get Dvorsky, you already had Snuggerud, you've got Neighbors, Bolduc, and people said it's a lot of forwards. And what Doug always reminded people is, guys, all of these guys will not play for the St. Louis Blues, because guess what other teams want in a time of need? Young forwards that can play in the NHL. And if the Blues continue to develop Bolduc and Snuggerud, and you've got Dylan Holloway now, you've got Jake Neighbors, you bring over Otto Stenberg. You know what all 5 of those guys do? They don't play center. They all play the wing. And you've already got Pavel Buchnevich, Robert Thomas, Jordan Kyrou on this roster. At some point, there's going to be too many mouths to feed and not enough food for them. And that's where teams typically, when they're ready to compete, when they're ready to win with a roster that they have in place, they ship some of these guys elsewhere to bring in the best player that they can to take them to the next level. All of the Stanley Cup contenders have done that. Look at what the Florida Panthers did to get Matthew Tkachuk. They're like, we've got the depth. Let's move on from Mackenzie Weegar and Jonathan Huberdeau and go get the guy that takes us to the next level. When the Chicago Blackhawks went on their run, they traded multiple young players to go get Marian Hossa and said, we're ready to compete now. So what Dylan Holloway does is add more weapons to the arsenal for Doug Armstrong so that when they're ready to compete, maybe it's next year, maybe it's 2 years from now, when Snuggerud's ready to be a top 9 forward, when Bolduc, when Stenberg, when all of these guys are ready, Doug's going to look at this and say, all right, who's the best ones that can help us win now? And what do we need moving forward? That piece is going to get them for us.
In an ideal world, I think this is the way that they would go into opening night. You tell me if you agree with this, Alex.
Is this guess the lines?
And this is not necessarily like how they would be constructed in terms of the 12 forwards, but for me, this is the easiest way for me to put it on a pen to paper. They could move up and down the line depending on kind of how things go. I think on the left side, you have something like Neighbors, Saad, Holloway, Joseph. Do you agree with that?
Yep, I got 3 of those 4.
On the right side, I've got Kyrou, Buchnevich, Torpo, Texier.
Yep.
Down the middle, Thomas, Dvorsky, Shin, Faksa.
Yeah, I don't.
That would be in my ideal world.
Yeah.
What it would look like going into opening night.
Yeah, in an ideal world, that is what my opening night lineup would look like. But I went down the path of saying Dvorsky is going to start in the minor leagues this season until. I mean, and all of this is going to be on, does Oscar Sundqvist come back healthy, ready to go? Does somebody get injured at some point? Do they need to find a way to slow play Braden Shen? Does somebody have a bad camp? I have Dvorsky and Bolduc, both, and Zach Dean, all 3 of those guys starting in the American Hockey League for this team.
Who did you have over Dvorsky then? Because you had the other 11.
I have,
the same.
So the 12 starting forward, Sundqvist was my other forward on the opening night, and then I have 2 extra forwards. and that's Kapanen and Nathan Walker.
Sure.
And some people are probably like, how do you have Kapanen on this roster over Zach Bolduc? Because I want Zach Bolduc to play top minutes. I don't want him sitting on the bench as the 12th forward.
Don't have him doing what Jordan Walker is for the Cardinals.
And frankly, that's probably why they brought back Kasperi Kapanen for $1 million. Dude, you're going to be our 14th forward because you can't even get in over Nathan Walker.
And that's fine.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. Like,
it's depth.
You need guys that are NHL caliber forwards that sit in the press box for you most nights. Yep. And that's just, hey, that's your role. Accept it, understand it, live it, and whenever you get in there and you get your opportunities, go be a pro for us. Yep. And that's what Kapanen's going to do for this team. What does that mean for their expectations for this season? Because I think that's a better forward group than what they had last year.
Oh, no doubt is.
Way deeper than what they had last season. I think you have few, like, when you look through those lines, you've got somebody that plays with a little bit of power on every line that goes closer towards the front of the net at a minimum. You've got center depth, unlike what you had a year ago, where hopefully Buchnevich is not going to be asked to play center for you this season. I think you've got speed in a way that you did not have a year ago. The lines just make more sense. You look at them, you're like, I'm not trying to put somebody in a position where it doesn't really fit for them. So how do you look at realistic expectations for this season, Alex? Because I don't want to get out over our skis and say, like, Stanley Cup final or bust. This team is not there right now. So how would you set the reasonable expectations now with these two moves made earlier today?
I believe you're a playoff team. And I'm not saying that this team is a Stanley Cup contender. Frankly, I don't know if this team wins a series. The only way you win a series in the playoff is because Jordan Binnington steals it for you. But we just talked about your forwards, and there's no question in my eyes that your forward group is better than last year. Now, a lot of this is going to be chemistry. We saw in 2019 how hard it is to get a lot of different bodies to play on the same mindset, and it took them 4 months to figure it out. But your defense has improved because you don't have, and it's going to sound like a shot, but it's not meant to be, you don't have Torrey Krug in this lineup. You don't have Scott Perunovich in this lineup. You don't have Tyler Tucker in this lineup. You've got a veteran in Ryan Suter. You've got Broberg, and you've got Letty all on the left side. And I look at the NHL and the Western Conference, like I think a lot of the playoff teams are going to be playoff teams next year. I do think Vegas got worse. I do think Edmonton is going to take a step back just in terms of their depth. They'll be fine. And I don't believe Winnipeg has gotten any better. So I think you're going to be in a group of 10 teams fighting for a playoff spot. And that's going to put you in the same spot as you were last year with the 4 teams in the Central Division, along with you in Minnesota and Utah. And then you're going to have 5 teams in the Pacific Division fighting for a playoff spot. And I think if you're talking about, and I said this to T-Bone last week, you were a minus 11 goal differential last season. And the difference between you and a playoff team in the Western Conference was plus 21. You fix your defense, you fix your bottom 6, you get the same goaltending. You're talking about being somewhere in that range, fighting for a playoff spot.
I think that's my hope. My expectation is just for it to look more entertaining on a night-in, night-out basis. And I know that sounds like such a low bar to clear.
Sounds like the Cardinals broke somebody.
But I don't want to be disappointed if they have the exact same record as they did last year. Like, I don't want to feel frustration
like there
in
weren't
the moment.
steps forward.
Yeah, because if they have the exact same season as last year and they do it with the younger guys being a big part as to how they got there, dude, that's better than what they did last year.
This team right here, and again, on paper, we saw what happened. This team should not have issues with teams like San Jose and Columbus when they take them on.
They probably will, because they've got a lot of young guys in the lineup. And so, like, man, Holloway's going to make mistakes, and you're going to look at it and you're going to say in the moment, God, that sucked. Like, that was a terrible play, an unacceptable play. And hopefully it doesn't make it again. And you're going to have nights where, like, Broberg makes a terrible pass in his own zone that gets put in the back of the net. That's going to happen because he's a 23-year-old defenseman who's learning on the job, potentially playing top pair minutes. Some of the toughest minutes in the league alongside Colton Parayko. That's in play for him this year. And so I don't want to be mad or frustrated about that costing them games, because that's the way it's supposed to happen. Like, the end goal for this season is for those guys to learn what it looks like on a night-in, night-out basis to avoid making those kinds of plays. Not just what can I get away with, but, like, how do I get away with it? What are some of the things that the veterans around the league, I'm going to learn from them, right? So if they go into this season and they finish 5th in the division, and really you never feel like they're, like, truly in the playoff race, and yet the young guys are taking steps and you're enjoying watching them, and there's, like, a fight about this team, there's a grit about this, a togetherness about the team, there's a way where that can actually end up being a more enjoyable experience to watch, and it gives you so much more confidence about what the future is going to be for the Blues going into this season. So that's where I'm at. It's not about a record for me. It's about a feel thing, and it's about watching the young guys develop. I don't really care what Brandon Saad does this year, just to be totally honest with you. I don't really care what Radek Faksa does this year. I don't really care what it looks like for Suter. I care about the young guys. I care about, does Thomas take another step? Does Kyrou take a step? Does Buchnevich look more like the player he was a couple of years ago than the player that he was this year now that he's on that long-term deal? What do they have in guys like Texier, in Joseph, in Holloway, in Neighbors, in now with Broberg? Those are the things that I'm going to be paying attention to this year far more than any bottom line record.
And think about this too. Sorry, T-Bone, to cut you off, but think about this. You didn't have this excitement of a roster for the NHL roster last year. You had maybe one guy, and
Absolutely.
It was Bolduc.
Last year, Neighbors would have been the other.
Last year you were saying, "Hey, we just got to wait for Dvorsky and Snuggerud and Lindstein and Stenberg." Now those guys are put on the back burner. I don't know if a lot of people are going to be talking about Jimmy Snuggerud right now for this upcoming season because of the group you have. This is the slow play, so you don't have to rely on those dudes to be saviors when they come in, because you've got a Dylan Holloway, you've got a Matthew Joseph, you've got an Alexander Texier, and a Bolduc who will be in the minors for you. That's how you develop guys without putting the pressure on them to say, hey, we need you to come in and be a 30-goal scorer.
He's Alex Ferrario. That's Tanner Hendrickson, and I'm Brandon Kiley. Coming up in about 15 minutes, we'll get into some questions and answers. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line to get your questions in. But coming up next, we're going to get into some NFL quick hitters here on 101 ESPN. Hey, it's BK. I wake up in the morning more energized now than I ever have before. And the reason why is because Victory Men's Health has unlocked my inner champion, and they could do the same thing for you. Check them out today. They've got 4 great locations across the St. Louis area, and victorymenshealth.com is where you can go to find out exactly what it is that they can do, whether it's low testosterone you're dealing with, you've got some weight loss goals that you've been having trouble to find a way to achieve. Well, they can help you out with that potentially over at Victory Men's Health. Erectile dysfunction issues, they can help you out with that. For me, it was vitamin deficiencies. I went in, I got my micronutrients lab back, and they said, hey, you're a little low on some of your vitamin levels, and we can help you out with that. We can get some of these supplements in there for you. They explained the entire process for me. It was a super easy process. I go to the locations over in Town and Country. Went in there the other day, said hello to everybody. It's a state-of-the-art location. It's not like going to some of these other low-T places where you walk in, it's dimly lit. Why, it feels like you're walking into a hospital. No, this is a beautiful location, state-of-the-art. Across the area, they've got 4 of them. You can also check them out today at victorymenshealth.com.
Don't settle for trading your car, truck, or SUV at a dealership. Get full retail value without the retail hassle at sellmycarstl.com. With a new convenient location on Manchester Road in Baldwin, that's sellmycarstl.com.
Hi, it's Randy Carricker for my friends at Golf Discount of St. Louis. When I'm adding a new club to my bag, I go and see the expert club fitters at Golf Discount of St. Louis. Equipped with GC quad launch monitors, their custom fitting studios have thousands of club and shaft combinations from all the top brands, making sure you get the perfect club for your swing every time. Plus, their fittings are always free with a club purchase. Locally owned and operated, now with 3 locations in O'Fallon, Missouri, South County, and now open in Edwardsville. It's the place to be for your golf needs. Golf Discount of St. Louis.
FarmSafe 811 starts with you. Always call 811 and wait for any underground lines to be marked.
Always keep safety in the back of your mind. Just stay humble.
For more information, go to farmsafe811.org.
Terry Hertz, New York Day Sports Center update driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. The St. Louis Blues have officially acquired defenseman Philip Broberg and forward Dylan Holloway as the Edmonton Oilers declined to match the offer sheets that the St. Louis Blues had signed them to, and we'll continue to break down those moves for the St. Louis Blues throughout the day here on 101 ESPN. Our Blues insider, Jeremy Rutherford, will join BK and Ferrario coming up at 1 o'clock today, and the Cardinals will be back in action as they start a 3-game set with the Milwaukee Brewers tonight. The Sports Center update is driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. See them at londoff.com. Chevy, together we drive. Are you kidding me?
Giving you the picture, the real big St. Louis sports picture. It's BK and Ferrario, live from the Car Shield studio on 101 ESPN.
All right, let's dive into some NFL quick hitters with Alex and T-Bone. I'm BK. Let's start out with the big story yesterday. Tua Tagovailoa did not hold back when he was asked to describe the difference between what he had in his previous head coach versus his current head coach. Now, his previous head coach was Brian Flores, who was a defensive-minded guy, learned under Bill Belichick in New England. He is a very hard-nosed style coach, Alex, and he clearly was not a huge fan of Tua Tagovailoa, and he made that known. Here is what Tua Tagovailoa had to say. Quote, to put it in the simplest terms, if you woke up every morning and I told you that you suck at what you do, you didn't belong at what you're doing, and you shouldn't be here, that this is a guy who should be here, that you haven't earned that right, then you have somebody else who comes in and tells you, dude, you're the best fit for this. How would that make you feel listening to one versus the other? And is that something that you would understand what I'm saying? That is how he explained the difference between playing for Flores versus playing for McDaniel. Alex, to me, this was just the latest example of, and people can call it soft, they can call it a different whatever you want to, that's fine, but it's the reality. This, to me, was the latest example of what a new era of coaching is going to look like. I think Flores is very much the old school, this would have worked 20 years ago. This is just the way that it was. And if you didn't figure it out as Tua Tagovailoa, well, the next coach is going to be coaching you the exact same way as this guy is right now. And now it's different. Better, worse, whatever, it's different. And Mike McDaniel is much more in line with the current way that you can get the most out of players than what Brian Flores is. What did you make of this story from Tua Tagovailoa and what it states about the current status of how you get the most out of young football players?
I think that's why you don't see Brian Flores as a head coach. I think that's why you see a lot of guys kind of fade off into the sunset as head coaches. I mean,
I think it's why Bill Belichick's not a head coach.
Yeah. I mean, like, it just... Tua is speaking from a guy who recently came from college. Like, I know he's been in the NFL for some time, but this is a dude who just came fresh out of college a few years ago. Like, college football is not that way anymore, to where they're yelling at these kids and telling them that they suck. And again, I know there's a ton of people probably on our text line in the graveyard chat saying, like, you guys are soft, this is how it should be. If you can't get the best out of a player with that approach, then you're not going to make it. Whether you believe the player's not going to make it or the coach isn't going to make it, one of the two isn't going to have success in the NFL, and guess which one is going to get fired first? It's going to be the head coach before a top pick that they've put stock into. So I think you're going to see a lot more of the Mike McDaniel approach, especially if you see success from Tua, and it's why you're going to see a lot more of the Brian Flores type of coach. I think you see that fade off into the sunset.
I mean, think about the best teams in the NFL right now and which approach they're taking. Like which style of coach that they have currently in charge. John Harbaugh's more of this than he is than the Flores.
I mean, Dan Campbell's probably the hard nose, and Dan Campbell is not a dude that's going to tell a player that they suck.
Dan Campbell is much closer to Mike McDaniel than he is Flores.
But he comes off like a Brian Flores to a lot of people, but it's not at his players.
Campbell's intense.
Yeah.
But Campbell is all about his players, man. And if you watched Hard Knocks, you can see that
100%.
Just how much he wants it for his guys. And so, yeah, he's got the passion. Absolutely. Like, that's that's a non-negotiable
It's a
as a
necessity.
head coach. If you don't have that, you can't do it. Like you're just going to fail because you're not going to be invested enough to be able to accomplish the hours, the work, the time, all of that. Like that's a necessity. Like you look at what Sean McVay is as a head coach. He's very much in line with this. You look at some of these other, like this is the way, man. And I understand it's different. Like DeMeco Ryans, very much like this. Like this is the style of coaching that he has. It's very much positive reinforcements. I think that what you're seeing in the NHL is a change in this regard as well. I think for baseball, we're seeing some of this where it is very much more a newer school approach. I'll be very curious to see kind of what this looks like 5 years from now as we get more of these stories that start to come out that show, hey, this is the way that kids prefer to be coached. Right, wrong, or indifferent, if that's where the kids are coming from, you got to meet them where they are. And this is going to be what we see more and more of in sports. Football seemed to be the last holdout in this regard. Basketball has been this way for a long time. But because of the physical nature, the different psyche that goes into football compared to some of these other sports, I think it was the last holdout to get to this particular place.
And I think you said it right with Dan Campbell, because like I saw a lot of people's response, well, Tua played for Nick Saban. It's not like that guy screens off as a
intensity.
Yeah, it's intense,
but
it's also not destroy your confidence.
Demeaning is different.
Yeah, it totally is. And I think that's what you're coming from of, there are intense coaches. Like you look at Dan Campbell, honestly, Kyle Shanahan looks like an intense coach.
Intense.
But then like you see some of the stuff, like if you watch the receiver series on Netflix, man, that guy's having a good time at practice. He's joking with the players. Like that's how players want to be coached. They want to learn, but they also don't want to learn by being just completely torn down. You got to keep their confidence up while also being willing to get into them a little bit as well.
If you break the confidence of a guy as important as a Tua is for that team, then what's the point of head coaching that team? Like, if you think you're going to break through for that player and he becomes this, like, statue of a player, sure, but you got to kind of read the room if you're Brian Flores and realize that, hey, that's not the best way. You got to be able to understand personalities if you're a head coach. And if you don't understand that that's not going to work with a guy like Tua, then you don't deserve to be the head coach.
I heard Jamie and Carrie talking about this the other day. They're doing their Ask the Former Athlete segment, and they talked about how, hey, if your coach actually cares about you personally, and you can tell the difference between if they're trying to put on a facade versus if they legitimately care about you as a human, like forget the sports side of things, just as a human being.
And both of those guys saw the end of the spectrum on both ends because
Absolutely.
Jamie played for Mike Keenan and Carrie played for Mike Tomlin.
Yeah. So they brought up, like, you can tell the difference, and when they care about you as a person, you want to go to bat for that guy. So I think that's what you're seeing here. There's just a different philosophy that's being implemented into coaching, and personally for myself, I think it's a good thing. I think it's been a long time coming, and it's about time that we got to this place. All right, other things in the NFL. You guys like Sunday Ticket, right? You like watching that throughout the NFL season. You got your red zone going on. You can have your, like, 8 box of Sunday games going on.
I like exclusively watch red zone.
But you have to have the Sunday Ticket to get the red zone package.
Or you find different ways.
You got to get the Sunday Ticket.
Sorry. I mean, yes, you have to pay the subscription for Sunday Ticket.
Have you guys seen what it's going to cost this year? Because I've paid for it in the past. It's typically like $250 or $300 through. I used to get it through DirecTV. That's what we have at home, so we just pay the package, right? $740. It is what is going to cost you this year via the Apple App Store. Now, you can also get it through YouTube TV. If you're a YouTube TV subscriber, I think it's like $350, $400, something like that. They've got a separate fee associated with YouTube TV that you can do with it. But for Apple, if you just want exclusively, you just want the app essentially, and you put it on your TV, you got the Apple TV, $740 per year. Who's paying for that?
Can you share that, like, with multiple people?
I don't think you can watch it on multiple platforms at once.
So like
that's
you
what
can't
it used to be, so I would assume it's the same.
Because the first thought is like, okay, it's a lot of money, but if I split it with my fantasy football group, then all of us are paying like $75 for this.
Dude, this is crazy.
Yeah, that's absurd amount of money.
Yeah,
I love football, but not for that much.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I'll just kind of stick to like the 3 games that are on locally. My doubleheader in the afternoon, and then my 1 game at 3 o'clock. And the other thing too is now there's so many primetime games. You think about it, like Sunday, you got Sunday night football, you got Monday night football, you got a Thursday night game. Now you're gonna have a Friday game when they start the season.
Got Monday.
Like for the old kind of like when it was kind of going, it was like, oh, okay, there's like what, 3 primetime games, so you're getting in theory 13 games in that kind of 12 and 3 o'clock window. Well, now there's so many games that go on in these primetime windows, especially when you get later on in the year. Like you're paying $700, and then like week 14, you're like paying for 7 games that you have to need the stream for.
I should probably make sure that we mention this. There's a lot of people that are saying, guys, you can get the Red Zone channel now with DirecTV just exclusively. No, you cannot. That is no longer the case. DirecTV is no longer going to be providing the NFL Red Zone or the Sunday ticket package.
You have to do both.
DirecTV is no longer a part of it.
Oh, really? They're gone. I thought it was both as a package.
That one is gone. Yeah. There is only one Red Zone channel now, and it is the YouTube TV. Like, it's just the NFL's version, and it's through specifically YouTube TV, but you can also apparently now buy it through Apple for $740, and that gets you the Sunday ticket plus the Red Zone channel. DirecTV is no longer associated with the Red Zone channel or with the Sunday ticket package any longer. This is the first year that that's going to be the case, and I will be very curious to see what the reaction is from fans as they see that this is what it's going to be for the 2024 season. Things are changing in a significant way with the way that the Sunday ticket package is going to be branded going into this season.
$750. That's absurd.
Dude. That's insane. And that's on top of like having stuff for the Sunday night packages and the Monday night packages and the Saturday night and the Thursday night. Like, dude, it's getting expensive. I would rather just go to a bar every Sunday.
Yeah.
Like, I'll just go over here and go to the Post or whatever. Like, go to your local
Buffalo Wild Wings.
whatever. For $750 over the course of 16 weeks, man, I'll just spend $20 a week and just enjoy my Sunday that way and give a nice tip, and I'm still spending less than it would cost me to go out there and pay for the Sunday package. That's insane. All right, with Alex and T-Bone, I'm BK. Coming up next, questions and answers here on 101 ESPN. I've done some more digging. I've got good news for NFL fans. This year, if you want to watch Red Zone, you can apparently watch it for $15 a month via the NFL Plus app.
Why did we just do this?
That does not include Sunday Ticket, though.
I was going to say, when he said that, I've got Fubo TV, and I was like, well, wait a minute. I watch NFL Red Zone on that last year.
I have Red Zone, and it's...
apparently, the NFL's pushing this because they want you to get the Sunday Ticket plus the Red Zone.
Of course, they want you to spend $750.
Don't do that. Don't do that. I say this as an NFL fan, as somebody that's looking out for all of you out there. Apparently you can do it via Hulu. If you just get the NFL Plus app, it's like $15 a month. You've got Red Zone.
Way to go, BK.
That's all you need. Don't get this Red Zone or this Sunday Ticket stuff. This is nonsense.
This is trash.
$750 for the for the Sunday Ticket. That's insane.
You save yourself time. You just see the best parts of the game rather than just the classic moving up and down the field and punting.
So I apologize. That was on me.
Thanks, man. You almost gave me a heart attack over here.
Yeah, I definitely had one as well. When I saw the price yesterday, I was like, I'm not paying for that. I don't know how I'm going to be watching all the games this year, but I'm not spending that kind of money. All right, 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line for questions and answers from the 314. Guys, why do you think it is that the Cardinals brass doesn't believe they are jeopardizing Jordan Walker's development by not playing him every day? Alex, do you have an answer on that?
No, I don't, because I do think there are parts of the Cardinals brass that do believe it's jeopardizing him, and there are parts of the Cardinals brass that don't believe, and then that's where the problem lies. I think it's because the Cardinals are in this denial that they're still able to compete for a playoff spot, and that's why you're not seeing Jordan Walker, because he doesn't give you the best chance to win, which we're going to argue that guys like Lars Nootbaar and Tommy Pham give you your best chance to win, which right now they do not.
I think, and we talked about this yesterday, the divide between the Cardinals, I think the front office is telling you they think the season's probably done. You know, they're prioritizing development. That's why they decided to call up Jordan Walker, and Ollie Marmol's not giving up yet. And, you know, you can love that or hate that. I actually respect the hell out of that Ollie Marmol's still saying we're going to push for the playoffs. But
at some time you got to be like, hey, maybe we're not.
That's not
I would
his
say
job,
it's
though.
Mo.
I would say Mo is the one that I fault Mo much more in this scenario than I do Ollie.
I said yesterday, I said, you know, at the early portion of the year, it is on Ollie to kind of develop guys, get them at bats. You know, he talked about platoons, which was a big deal over the weekend with Alec Burleson more specifically.
Sure.
Okay, the first 3-4 months of the season, it makes sense to get him at bats against lefty. Get a sample size, see if he can hit them, and if he can't, once you get to the home stretch of the season, the final sprint, now Ollie Marmol has to construct his best lineup. That development side of things suddenly shifts from Ollie's kind of department early on to in the final sprint, it's Mo's job. Mo's job is to do what's best for Jordan Walker and say, okay, how do we develop him? And right now, he's not doing it. Right now, he's once again the third manager in a row. There's this major disconnect on how to handle such a top prospect in Jordan Walker.
All right, from the 314. Guys, do you think that the Blues just became one of the fastest teams in the league up front? They've got Kyrou, Booch, Thomas, Holloway, Texier, Bolduc, Torpo, Joseph, and Saad. That is a lot of speed.
Fastest in the league? Absolutely not. I think they're faster than what they were last year, and I think they have a really good mix, because in my opinion, what you want to have speed is you got to have a big centerman who can drive the play. If you have a big centerman who can drive the play, and then you got forwards who can retrieve the puck. But the forwards, if they're fast, they have to be strong on the board still. And so, like, if I just look at the combinations you and I put together, BK, you got strength down the middle. Thomas Schenn, Faksa, Sundqvist, with the potential of Dalibor, Dvorsky. All of those dudes are big. They can retrieve pucks for you. They can drive the play. On every wing, you got a speedy guy, and you've got a guy who can retrieve the pucks. Kyrou with Saad, Neighbors with Booch, Holloway with Joseph, Texier with Toropchenko. I think that's an ideal combination. It really comes down to, can your centerman keep the play going?
They're not the fastest, but it wouldn't shock me if they're like fringe top 10 in that 10 to 15 range. They definitely have more speed than they did a year ago.
I think you're faster than Winnipeg. I think you're faster than Nashville. I think you're faster than Minnesota. Don't know yet about Utah. Utah's pretty fast.
Nashville's
and you're obviously
really
old. Nashville is, like, people are excited about Nashville. Nashville's old. And then you're going to probably be right in line with Chicago because of their youth.
I like that they have a clear identity. Like, they've gone with size down the middle and speed on the wing. Mm-hmm. That's smart. That works. I've seen that work in the NHL for 20 years.
It's what Dallas does.
It's what every contending team
Colorado does too.
Part, you know, like, get your size down the middle. That's where you've got your strength, your girth, and then on the outside you get speed going down the edges. That makes a lot of sense. And then have a good combination of puck movers that have some speed and skill, that have size as your defensive core. Now, this is not an easy thing to do. If those guys were growing on trees, every team in the league would have them. But that should be the goal, and I think the Blues are getting closer to being able to attain said goal. With Alex and T-Bone on BK, coming up in 15 minutes, we'll get into a game of Bet It or Forget It. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line. If you guys have a scenario, we'll get to it coming up at 12:15. But next, we mentioned the Jordan Walker debate, and I think that that's kind of been hashed out at this point. We've pretty much said what needs to be said on Jordan Walker. But how much longer do the Cardinals keep pushing? As if they're a legitimate contender if things keep going in this direction. We'll talk about that, what it could mean for their player decision-making processes next year on 101 ESPN. With Alex and T-Bone on BK, so I feel like we've made our thoughts pretty well known on the Jordan Walker thing. I get what Ollie's doing. I get it. From a managerial perspective, you've got a right-handed bat that hits the lefties better than your left-handed bats hit the lefties. I get it. It also isn't very smart, in my opinion, for the president of baseball operations to make that decision possible for the manager. What should have happened is, hey, Jordan Walker's not coming here if you're not going to play him every day. And if that was Ollie's perspective, cool. We'll bring somebody else up, whether that's Thomas Ajayci, maybe they decide to DFA Fermin, or just bring up Jose Fermin. If he's going to play once every 3 days, fine. Bring up Jose Fermin and put him into that role. But Alex, that to me is a conversation that we've had enough. So let's talk about something a little bit different, but semi-related. Katie Woo wrote this yesterday in The Athletic. Quote, the Cardinals' playoff hopes are on the line, and Ollie Marmol and his coaching staff are going off of what the numbers say best gives them the chance to maximize what has been a massively disappointing offense. So don't expect Walker or Tommy Pham to start in any of their next 3 games, as the Milwaukee Brewers have 3 right-handers lined up against the Cardinals for their series starting on Tuesday. There is, quote, no overstating how imperative that series will be, end quote. Again, that came from Katie Woo over at The Athletic. You can look beyond this series. As of today, the next 10 starters projected to go against the St. Louis Cardinals are right-handed pitchers. That may change. We know subject to change. They could go with an opener. There could be some changes to who's going to start on any given day, but that's what the current anticipation is. Alex, if the Cardinals go 1-5, something like that, in their next 6 games, they struggle against the Brewers and then eventually against the San Diego Padres as well. How long, or excuse me, against the Twins after this. How long do you keep going as if you are a part of this playoff race? How long do you keep doing what they're doing right now?
I mean, I'm not even going beyond the Minnesota Twins series. I'm looking at just the Milwaukee Brewers one. If you go through this Milwaukee Brewers series and you don't win a game, which part of me believes they're not going to win a game against Milwaukee, I don't know how you can still sell it that you're a playoff team. Now, I understand you're only 5 games out of a wild card spot and the Atlanta Braves are dealing with all of the injuries, but I just look at the teams around you, and you've scored like 50 or more runs less than all of these teams. Your run differential is abysmal compared to these other teams. Like, these other teams are viewed as a playoff team that could get in. And
you're closer to the Nationals than you are the Giants or the Mets.
What is it? Since July 1st, you're the second worst team in the in Major League Baseball.
National League, yeah.
You can't keep living in this denial that we could still get into the playoffs if we go on some historic run. Guess what? That can be the same statement with Jordan Walker in the lineup and Alec Burleson and Nolan Gorman and Ivan Herrera called up in the lineup. That could be the same statement as playing Tommy Pham and Lars Nootbaar and all of these other players. You could go on a run in the second half because the second half seems like a little bit easier. But I'm not looking beyond the Milwaukee Brewers series because I don't know what else I need to see for this team to give me hope that they can still get in. Sure, you're 5 games out of the playoffs, but since the beginning of August, you've lost to the Cubs, you've lost to the Reds, you've lost to the LA Dodgers. If you screw up against the Milwaukee Brewers, there's no signs of life for this team. So if you can't win the series against the Milwaukee Brewers, and frankly, I think you have to sweep the series against the Milwaukee Brewers to give me hope. I think after that 3rd game, when you lose, I look at this and say, you know what? We wish we were in a playoff position, but right now our hope is we're in the playoffs in 2025, and let's play these guys that are pivotal for that role.
That's where I'm at. I think it's this series. I know that there will be people that say you keep going on further than that, but dude, like, time to make some decisions.
Absolutely.
You're right now 11 games back in the division. This division's over. I don't care if you sweep the next 6 games against the Brewers. You're not coming back. It's over. You're done. And in the National League wildcard standings, you're 5 games back of the Braves right now. Let's be serious about this, man. You are basically the same distance away from the Braves as you are from the Nationals, and the Nationals are the 3rd worst team in the National League. It's like, get out of here with this. You're not a playoff contender right now. You don't have what it takes to make it to the postseason. I was wearing the damn hat as the conductor of this train, and the train has gone off of the tracks. It's not working. The current roster construction, for whatever reason, it failed in 2024. And so would I love to see this team in the postseason? Sure, I guess. But honestly, it's so far-fetched to even imagine how that happens at this point in the season. Forget it. Like, you see one more series, see what it looks like against the Brewers. You're at home. You got Fetty, Gibson, Michaelis on the mound, whatever. It's not going to hurt you to have these guys up for the next few days and to play it out the way that you want to. But after that, take a deep breath. Going out on the road to Minnesota, it's time to just start playing the young guys. And that might mean some drastic changes around here. Like, I think that means probably DFAing Brandon Crawford. I think that means deciding to make a decision
DJ BC.
on... Like, does Tommy Pham want to be a part of a platoon? Is that something that he's really enjoying?
I think you could ask that about 4 or 5 guys on this team.
I think that means Paul Goldschmidt, hey, we appreciate everything you've done, sir. It's time for Alec Burleson to get most of the starts at first base for us. Hey, let's bring up Ivan Herrera. Let's see what Thomas Saggese looks like. That last month of the season last year, super valuable for Mason Wynn to be able to make the necessary adjustments in the offseason to be the player that he's been for the Cardinals this year. Let's see if Thomas Saggese can do something similar. Even if he fails spectacularly over the next 6 weeks, what's it hurting you? Get a head start on off-season moves that you want to see going into next year. That's what I'd be doing down the stretch, and I think it starts after this series against Milwaukee. I would be fine with starting it today.
I was going to say,
I think you learned what you needed to in the series against Cincinnati and the Dodgers, but they clearly are not there. I would have taken yesterday as the off day and just reset the roster.
Yep.
But since they're not going to do that, that's fine. Give it the series against Milwaukee. It's a divisional opponent. Maybe they think, hey, let's see if we can catch something, lightning in a bottle, whatever. When that doesn't happen, and when, not if, against Minnesota, it's time. It's time to make the necessary adjustments.
And I'm waiting a little longer. I'm going to the end of the Padres series because I thought they played well against the Dodgers. They didn't come out on top. And again, they're not in a spot for moral victories right now. But I would at least give them another week and a half. By the time we get to the end of that Padres series, honestly, the last game of that Padres series, if you've dropped 2 of 3 to San Diego and you're going into that Thursday afternoon game, okay, now's probably about the time where you start to have that conversation of what do we do to kind of reset this roster. I'm agreeing with you guys. I'm not trying to sit here on hopium and think, oh, they're going to get back in it. But I think once you get to that Padres series, I think that's when you kind of reassess. And the fact that you're 5 games out in the wild card race right now and the Braves are putting their roster together with toothpicks and bubblegum right now just tells me how far off you are. The Braves are sustaining actual injuries. Meanwhile, the Cardinals were well, we're without Tommy Edman, who was going to hit 9th for us. So our offense can't really get things going early in the season.
That's my thing here is, man, if you couldn't compete in this version of the National League, it speaks really poorly of the roster that you've constructed. Because you look around. I looked at this last night, Alex. The Braves have been without Spencer Strider and Ronald Acuna for the vast majority of the season. Ozzie Albies has missed significant time. Now Austin Riley is out the next 6 to 8 weeks. The Brewers have been without Devin Williams for almost the entirety of the season. Christian Yelich played 70 games in 2024, and they have started 17 different players in a game as a starting pitcher for them. 17 different starters this year. The Dodgers have 10 pitchers, including 6 starters, on the injured list right now. The Cardinals have stayed relatively healthy from a position player core standpoint. Yes, they missed 6 weeks from their starting catcher, but otherwise, Tommy Edman is your biggest injury that you've had for the season. Dylan Carlson, I suppose. It's mostly just been underperformances. Each of the top 4 starters for you have made at least 21 starts. Big question coming into the season as to whether or not that would be possible. Helsley, JoJo, Kittredge, Fernandez, your top 4 relievers have all appeared in at least 47 games so far this year. They've all been healthy and, generally speaking, pretty damn effective for you. There also isn't a single team right now on pace in the National League for more than 95 wins, and the Cardinals couldn't find a way to break through. And it wasn't going to happen.
Yep.
If it was always going to be Goldie and Arenado being this version of themselves, Gorman took a step back, Walker took a step back, Nootbaar took a step back, well, their roster construction fails.
That's because, and that's where I fall on this, is right now, the Cardinals are saying they're not acting as if they're 2 games out of the wild card and they just need to continue to play 500. They're telling us that the only way we're going to get into the playoffs is if we go on a run here. And guess what? You have never gone on a run this season. The last time you went on a run, and Katie talked about this yesterday, was back in May. That's when you went on a run. And you've been running the same roster out there that you're trying to tell us is going to give you the best chance to win right now. So if you're going to live on this island of the only way we could get into the playoffs is if we go on a run, then why not try something different? Why not focus on, hey, we could still get into the playoffs if we go on a run with guys like Ivan Herrera up taking at-bats for us, with Jordan Walker in the lineup every single day. I know you don't believe he's got you giving you your best chance to win with his at-bat approaches and how bad he's looked, but right now, even if you get in by some miracle to the playoffs, Nobody believes you can do anything. No, you're not.
This team's not making it.
But again, the Cardinals like to live in denial of like, we still have a chance. Let's say you get in. You're not doing anything. Yeah. Right now, the sole focus for this team, and I'm talking about the management side of it, not just the front office. Your sole focus is making sure that I know what my roster looks like for 2025.
But if I'm Ollie, I'm not doing that. Like, this is where things get really difficult from a
But if I'm Ollie, I'm living in denials thinking that I'm going to be in the playoffs this year.
That's what you have to do. That's what you, like, your job every day is to come in and try to win that day. And part of that is because, like, dude, Ollie's job is very much in question. And we all can look at it and see that. Like, we don't know if Mo's going to be here. So if I'm in Ollie's shoes, I'm trying to win every single day to get that record to look as good as possible by the end of the year. Because whether it's Mo that's making the decision, or the DeWitts that are making the decision, or the next president of baseball operations that's making the decision, I want to put myself in a situation where I can be the manager of the Cardinals again in 2025.
Well, let me ask you then this, because...
And I'm just speaking from Ollie's perspective,
no,
right?
I get
like,
it.
I'm not saying it's the right thing. They're in a really bad place right now that's the way that the manager's thinking.
And I'm generally asking this question. I'm not trying to be sarcastic here. What gives you a better shot of being the manager for the Cardinals long term? Barely squeaking by and getting into a playoff and then getting bounced in 2 games?
I don't know what the other option is, but that.
I would argue your best chance to stick around long term is if you're putting the faith into some of these players and trying to get the development.
Too late.
And like,
if that was going to be his way to be the manager next year for whoever is making the decision, it would have happened by now. And what I mean by that is, like, if we were going to see that development, Walker would have already shown it, or Gorman would have already shown it. I don't think there's anything that can take place in the next 5 weeks that will change Cardinals fans or the Cardinals' opinion on whether or not that can happen.
And I got to be honest with you, if he gets into the playoffs, I don't think that keeps his job secure.
I think it would. I don't think they'll fire him if he were to go on some kind of an unbelievable run that none of us can currently see coming.
I mean, Mike Schilt did it, and he was still fired.
Fair. But if he doesn't have philosophical differences, we'll see, with the front office, and they end up making the postseason, I think that would save his job for sure. I'm not even sure that his job is necessarily up for grabs right now. But if he makes the postseason, certainly wouldn't be the case, in my opinion. I think right now, looking at it through his lens, you're trying to win every day. What gives us the best chance to win this game? I think there will come a point in time where the front office has to make that decision for him as to, hey, we can't do this anymore. We are no longer going to be pushing every day. You no longer have Brandon Crawford as a part of this roster. You no longer have the option of going to some of these veterans because Tommy Pham's not here anymore. He's going through whatever, right? Like, those are the kinds of things that eventually, it's what they did with Mike Matheny, where they took away his toys and said, you have to play the young guys now. That could be something that they end up having to do here, where they just say, here are your players, this is what you're going to do down the stretch. And Ollie will do that. He's a good soldier, but, man, it's a stark divide from what he's been trying to do over the past week or so.
And in defense of Ollie, you know, what we talk about, what made him successful in 2022, it was being able to maximize the roster he had, playing platoons, having Pujols coming off of the bench. In his defense, he hasn't had that this year. His roster has been hamstrung by the fact that he has 2 coaches in uniform. And their bench is the worst in baseball. BK told us over the weekend it's a -1 WRC+. I didn't even know you could get a minus in that category. That's how bad their bench has been.
2 extra base hits as pinch hit opportunities.
And one of them's a grand slam
within the last 3 weeks. One was the grand slam by Tommy Pham. The other was the Newt Bar home run over the weekend. They did not have a single extra base hit from a pinch hitter until July 30th. Think about that. 3 months of the regular season, and they had 0 extra base hits from a pinch hitter. And that is despite a roster that is constructed to have guys that are coming in those pinch hit situations, and despite having 2 guys on the corners of the infields that have not hit anywhere near what their expectations were this year. It's been bad. It's been bad, and they need an overhaul. From the top down, this thing needs to get a massive... There has to be sweeping changes this offseason. Yep. I saw another piece earlier today, Alex.
Goldschmidt's coming back?
ESPN.com on the top free agents that are going to be available this offseason. Do you know how much time I spent reading that? Like 2 minutes.
That was 2 minutes too long, buddy.
They talked about Juan Soto, who's going to cost the GDP of a small country.
Well, the Cardinals have that.
Corbin Burns, who's going to get more than $200 million. And then I went down to the $100 million players, and it was Alex Bregman, Pete Alonso, Matt Chapman, Willie Adames, and Ha-Sung Kim. And then Blake Snell and Max Fried and Jack Flaherty. And I said to myself, man, those are the kinds of players that the Cardinals need, and they are not getting any of them. And then I decided to stop looking at it.
Did you scroll down to the guys who could get 1-year deals for like $5 million? And like, these guys might be fun.
I mean,
It's funny that you
the
believe
lowest tier on this was the wild cards, and it included Cody Bellinger, Jordan Montgomery, and Garrett Cole. And I'm like, those guys aren't coming here.
Ooh. It's funny that you believe Brandon Crawford won't be on this roster next season.
Marp is so back.
This is as down as I've been on the Cardinals since I moved to St. Louis.
Well, then guess what? There's another team in St. Louis that's got us all hyped up.
Coming up next, better to forget it here on 101 ESPN. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line for Bet It or Forget It. You give us a scenario. We will tell you if we're betting it or forgetting it here on 101 ESPN. Alex, bet it or forget it. When you look this year at the teams most likely to make the postseason for the AFC, you would include the Indianapolis Colts on that list. Bet it or forget it. The Indianapolis Colts will make the postseason this year in the AFC.
Of course, Mr. Anthony Richardson's biggest fan jumps into this
some
one.
Of my predictions for last night because I wanted to get it all down on a sheet. I've got them.
Let's hear it.
Got them in.
Let's hear it.
I've got the Colts in. They're one of my teams, so I'm betting this.
Remind me again, it's
seven.
Seven
you
that
got
get
four
in?
divisional winners, and then you got the three wild cards. I've got the Jets, the Bengals, and the Colts as my three wild cards currently.
I've got the Bills, I've got the Chiefs, I've got the Ravens, and I've got the Texans as your division winner. So those are my four teams. I think the Bengals get in. I think the Dolphins and the Jets get in. So I'm gonna say forget it. Because I just listed off 7 teams that they're not in. I think you get 3 from the East, you get 1 from the West, you get 2 from the North, and 1 from the South.
I think I'm going to forget it as well. I like the way you're thinking, because I think if Richardson is healthy, I think they probably are.
Somebody will surprise us. We always do this every year where we're like, we know who all the playoff teams are, and then last year Pittsburgh makes it in.
Who's the team that falls out of it that you believe is in it now?
The Dolphins. For me, I do not have the Dolphins making it into the postseason.
Mine's either the Dolphins or the Jets.
I have the Dolphins missing out, and then I have the Steelers missing out, the Browns missing out. Those would be the teams that probably would be surprising to others that they might have and that I don't.
Yeah, I would forget it just because I don't trust the health of Anthony Richardson. If he's healthy, I'm all aboard. The problem is I saw last year he couldn't stay healthy, and they're probably going to run a lot of the same style offense because when he was healthy, it worked. And if he's injury prone, they're not going to be a playoff team without him. So I'm going to say forget it.
Alex?
Guys, bet it or forget it. Philip Broberg, by the end of his first contract with the Blues, is playing on the number 1 power play unit.
I'm going to say forget it. So at the end of these next 2 years, one of the other defenseman prospects is a big-time power play guy. Yeah, I'll say forget it. I don't think he's going to be on the top power play. I don't even know that he's going to be on it this year. Forget it.
I'm going to forget it as well. I think by the time the end of this first contract, your hope, if you're the Blues, is Lindstein's that guy. So I will forget it. I don't think he'll be the top guy. Maybe he's the second guy if they give him a couple runs, but I'm not saying top.
That's a big jump, too, for Lindstein. I mean, because I guarantee you they're telling you that the hope is Lindstein is playing this power play next year, but the question's going to be, is he going to be here on this year? I'm actually going to bet this one. I think you got a guy who does have some offensive upside, and he's just never been given the opportunity. It's really going to come down to how are you in terms of moving the puck and creating offense from it. I think to start the season, Falk's going to be the number 1 guy, but by the end of the season, I wonder if Philip Broberg's getting some reps up there.
Guys, last year, the St. Louis Blues finished with 92 points. The roster is now done, I think.
Hey, not just yet. Mitch Marner's still available.
Army could pull off another one. Bet it or forget it. Blues finished with more than 92 points this season.
Forget it.
Bet it.
I think they end up lower.
I think you're talking about 95, 96 points. And still, I think you're a fringe playoff team. It's really going to come down to how teams like Minnesota, Las Vegas, Seattle, and Utah play. And I would give them the upper hand over a majority of those. I say 96 points, and they just get in the 8th spot.
I would say forget it. I still, even though I love these additions, I still think the West got a little bit better, and I think you're like where I think I said Minnesota, Calgary were last year, anywhere between 81 to 87 points still.
I'm forgetting it here. I think that you end up below, and I think it's because of what I said earlier. I don't think you're necessarily a worse team, but you're going to have mistakes that are more costly this year.
I think a lot of people believe what T-Bone said, that the West did improve. Guys, if you look deeper, I don't know that it has. Dallas got worse. They lost Joe Pavelski. Like, that is a dude that was their number 1 center for them for the longest time.
A lot of change in the West this year.
Winnipeg has lost multiple players on their roster. Colorado, I mean, they don't have Valeri Nichushkin anymore on this team, and they still got the same lame goaltender. Nashville's the one that's improved. Utah's improved a little bit, but Vegas has gotten worse. LA has gotten worse. I actually don't know that the West got significantly better. I think you got a couple of teams that improved, and that's about it.
All right, better to forget it. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line. We'll go through a couple of these from the text line right now. This one comes from the 636. Better to forget it. The Seahawks will make the playoffs this year. I did not have them in for the NFC side of things, and we'll go through these a little bit more next week. But I've got the Cowboys, Falcons, Lions, and 49ers. I think those are kind of the chalk to win their divisions. And then I've got the Packers, Eagles, and Bears as my wild card teams in the NFC.
Yeah, I have.
Where were my Rams at in that mix?
Did not have your
They don't
Rams
have a
in the mix.
quarterback, man.
Their defense scares me.
Yeah.
I think their offense could be like top 10 in the league.
They made the
top
playoffs
5 even.
last year without a great.
Yeah, they had Aaron Donald.
Whatever. He was old and ready to retire.
I had the Packers, I had the Eagles, but I had the Buccaneers as getting into the playoffs again.
Yuck. I think they're going to win like 6 games this year.
Yeah, what we said last year, and they found a way to sneak into the playoffs.
I think the OC loss is a big deal.
I'm as much of a hawk as I am for the Bears. I do think that they're going to kind of be one of those fringe playoff teams.
That's fair.
I'm going to say for the Seahawks, forget it. I think they finished last in the West.
Wow.
I think the
Cardinals.
Cardinals. I think the Cardinals take a step forward, and I think they're the
Rams are the worst
7-win team. I think you're going to see Seattle's the worst.
The Rams are the worst team.
I think the Rams are making the playoffs. That's why I was like shocked when he said.
Who's throwing the ball for him?
What do you mean? They've got Matt Stafford.
Yeah, Stafford's fine until he gets hurt.
Broberg and Holloway will go down as 2 of Army's best moves in his tenure as Blues GM. I mean, it's so hard for that to be the case, man. He's made some really big, important moves that resulted in a cup.
I do think it'll be top 5 by the end of their time. I think.
You also thought the Logan Brown move was top 5.
Not one of my best moments, man. Not one of my best moments. But I would argue the injury to Logan Brown didn't really benefit them. I mean, look, Ryan O'Reilly's never going to be beaten.
He's on a PTO, by the way.
Yeah, so he's going literally back to Tampa. Why not, man? Why not? Verana's going back to Washington where it all started, too. So
it's never too late to go home.
I think Ryan O'Reilly's going to go down as the number 1 move no matter what. Braden Shen's up there. You can't forget the Yaroslav Halak trade that he made when he first came in because this team was desperate for a goaltender. Jay Bouwmeester's always going to be up there, but I would put this as a top 5, and I think it will be by the end of it.
Yeah, I would.
Troy Brouwer.
Yeah. Troy Brouwer. I mean, Troy Brouwer doesn't.
That changed the out.
Brouwer doesn't get you to the cup.
It was like 1 year.
Brouwer was the start of the cup, though. That was the start of the cup run.
I'm giving more credit to trades that were here for multiple years.
And that was Chicago in the playoffs.
Chicago was broken after that series.
Totally changed.
You became one of the top teams in the West after that season.
Glad we align on this, man.
The hockey guy here says no. Broberg, if Broberg reaches his ceiling as a pairing mate with Parayko,
and define that, what does that mean?
To me, that means it's like legitimate shutdown pairing. He's a guy that you look at and top pair defenseman. Not Alex Pietrangelo, but there's no replacing Pietrangelo. But like now you look at Parayko and Broberg as a combined unit, and you go, that's special.
Look, his potential is a top 10 pick in the draft. That's the potential you're talking about.
That to me would probably be second or third among all of Army's moves. So I would bet it would reach the list.
I think you could argue that it is second. I don't think there's any way that it becomes a better move than what he did with Ryan O'Reilly.
I agree with that.
I like that.
That's the one move for me.
I'm sorry, but I don't know if anything will ever trump the Braden Shen one other than O'Reilly because you traded away that was like 5. And I know you traded 2 first-round picks with it, but look at who those two first-round picks turned into.
And Shen was perfect for
this
what
team
you needed.
He's been one of the best players, if not, I think the best player in almost every category since he was acquired.
Yeah, he was a really good player, and it was the perfect timing for that style of player to fit into what they needed at the time. Like it was. Yeah, this could make the ceiling for this is top 3.
Yeah, real quick on T-Bone talking about the potential or the ceiling for Broberg. You ask what it is. The 2 other defensemen that were drafted before Broberg in this draft was Moritz Seider with the Detroit Red Wings, who's viewed as a number 1 guy, and Bo Byram, who was with Colorado, who just never panned out, but viewed as a top pairing guy with Buffalo.
We'll talk about this more with Jeremy Rutherford coming up at 1 o'clock. The other player that's heading to St. Louis, Dylan Holloway, is going to have a Zoom conference at 1:15, so we'll hear from him. You'll hear that live right here in your home of the Blues, 101 ESPN, coming up at 1:15. But next, T-Bone asked an interesting question of us earlier today. How much of Drew Bannister's job evaluation is tied to Broberg's development over the next 2 years? He'll answer that for you. We'll give you our thoughts as well next here on 101 ESPN.
Alex Ferrario with you to talk about my insurance agent, Tracy Bibb, and I'm talking to the Illinois residents right now because Tracy sent me a message last night. Really, right now, it is a difficult insurance market, meaning there's a lot of companies that are seeing a ton of rate pressures. So what that means is rates are increasing, and those companies, they're canceling a lot of people who have accidents in their past history. So if you've got those, then there's issues that arise with it. But Allstate right now, I talk about it all the time, they've got better rates and can write coverage for a lot more of situations that other companies can't do for you. So if you are in Illinois, reach out to Tracy today and see how you can save money as well as keep you covered. And you hear me talk about all the time how they're always there for you. Customer service is at its best. So if you're an Illinois resident, it's time to call Tracy Bibb. All you need to do is give her a call, 314-328-4260. Tell her Alex Ferrario sent you and ask about that free non-committal quote. She walks you through the entire process. Super simple. 314-328-4260. It's no fib. You're always in great hands with the Bibb.
It's Jamie Rivers for Window World. Did you know that over half of Window World's appointments this year come from repeat customers or their referrals? That's a testament to the outstanding customer service, top-notch quality, and dedication to creating loyal customers. And here's the local touch. The St. Louis location has been proudly owned and operated by St. Louisans for over 21 years for exceptional service and quality. Call Window World at 314-993-1800, and you can always visit them at windowworldstlouis.com.
It's Mattress Firm's best sale of the year, Labor Day sale. Save up to $900 on select adjustable mattress sets from Stearns & Foster, Tempur-Pedic, and Sealy. Plus, get up to a $300 instant gift for pillows and more.
Terry Hendricks Near Day Sports Center update driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. The St. Louis Blues have officially acquired defenseman Philip Broberg and forward Dylan Holloway from the Edmonton Oilers, as the Edmonton Oilers this morning declined to match the offer sheets that the St. Louis Blues had signed them to. Dylan Holloway's press conference will be at 1:15 today. You'll be able to hear that live here on 101 ESPN. We'll also hear from our Blues insider Jeremy Rutherford coming up at 1 o'clock today as well. This Sports Center update is driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. See them at londoff.com. Chevy, together we drive. Are you kidding me?
Giving you the picture, the real big St. Louis sports picture. It's BK and Ferrario, live from the Car Shield studio on 101 ESPN.
So how much of Drew Bannister's job evaluation this year is tied to Broberg's development? That's a question that T-Bone asked us in our pre-show meeting earlier today. With Alex and T-Bone, I'm BK. As T-Bone mentioned, Jeremy Rutherford going to join us to talk about all of these things Blues related. The big news today that the Blues will get both players from Edmonton. He joins us at 1 o'clock. Dylan Holloway, one of the players, the forward that's coming over from Edmonton, will have his press conference media availability at 1:15. You'll hear that right here on your home of the Blues, 101 ESPN. T-Bone, if I asked you the question, threw it to you, as you did for me and Alex earlier today, how would you answer it? How much are you evaluating Bannister this year and next based upon what you see from Broberg?
I think a big chunk of it for me on Bannister is tied to Broberg. Now, he's not the sole guy, but for me, he takes up a big chunk of that pie. And it's because this is the guy that they've been chasing their tail after since Pietrangelo walked out the door. They've been looking for the number one defenseman replacement for him. They thought, okay, Parayko's that guy. They found out Parayko's a good defenseman, can play on the top pair, but not the alpha number one. So what do you need to do? You need to find someone that pairs with him, and they just create that alpha together. So I think it's a big deal for him to try and work along and develop him because we've talked about it. Broberg's not there yet. He played well in the conference finals, and he played well in the Stanley Cup final, but this is a overpay of a contract. This is projecting forward is what this deal does. I think it's a big chunk of how you evaluate Drew Bannister. If he can't get the best out of this defenseman, a thing that we saw that the Craig Berube era had a trouble time with was getting the best out of puck-moving defensemen. And look, Broberg, different category than Vince Dunn and some of those other guys that flamed out here. But to me, this is a big deal because this is the guy, and I've said this and I truly believe it, this is the kind of acquisition, that guy that pairs with Colton Parayko, that maybe doesn't make them exit the retool today, but is the big reason when we're looking 3 years down the road and they're in their winning window, we go, aha, that's the day when they started to accelerate past this retool period.
Yeah, I like where your thought process is. I just don't know if Drew Bannister's tied to any one player in terms of how he's being evaluated. He gets that 2-year deal. A lot of that 2-year deal to me felt like it was a clean break from everything for Alexander Steen to make a decision. And prior to Philip Broberg, you looked at the roster, and it didn't feel like, I think a lot of people would say, oh, well, Bannister's tied to Jordan Kyrou. I think the Blues know what they've got in Jordan Kyrou, and it's building the roster around him and trying to figure it out from there. And then it's tied to Jake Neighbors and Zach Bolduc and Jimmy Snuggerud. I don't think they're taking that into consideration with Drew Bannister because those guys are so young that it's going to take time to develop. I really feel like where Drew Bannister is at is he's being evaluated off of the success for the Blues the next 2 seasons. And the guy that comes to mind for me...
Losses?
Yeah, wins and losses. And the guy that comes to mind for me is what Davis Payne was back in 2010, 2011. And for people that don't remember, Payne took over for Andy Murray in the middle of the season, and he got them to be a competitive team, but it was like, okay, we are on the fringe of starting to compete. We need you to start winning games. Davis Payne won in that second half of the season, and then the next season, Davis Payne started off 6-7. And this was a group of guys. Backus was 27, Oshie was 24, Petro was 21. They had Perron, they had Berglund, they had Shattenkirk, they had Steen, they had Stewart. Like they had both Elliott and Halak. They had their core in place. And Payne was fired because that team was underperforming when they were starting to exit out of this retool. And they went out and they got Ken Hitchcock. I think where this is at right now is Drew Bannister has got 2 years to try and get this team into the playoffs. And if they don't take the step in terms of becoming a playoff team in 2 years, that's where they look at this and say, all right, now we need to take the next step.
I'm not there yet. I think that's probably more of a next year thing for me. For right now, it's almost hard to really evaluate specifically what I'm looking for. I kind of want to see these guys first. I know that sounds silly, but like Jake Neighbors is in one category. Can you get more out of Neighbors, or honestly just the same as you did a year ago out of Neighbors? As the league adjusts to him, can he continue having the same kind of success? Is there anything more there from Kyrou, Thomas, or Booch? Because it would be nice if there is, but if there's not, okay, it is what it is. How does he do with reclamation projects? Guys like Texier, Joseph, can you get a little bit more out of them than what they were able to get previously, or at least kind of similar to what you got? And then it really comes down to the young guys with Dvorsky, Holloway, Broberg, and eventually Bolduc. Like, what are you able to get out of them? And I think ultimately that is the bucket that he's most going to be judged based upon. What does Dvorsky look like here? When Holloway and Broberg are implemented into the lineup, are you able to get more out of what they were able to get out of them in Edmonton? Can Bolduc take another step under your leadership here in St. Louis? That's what I'm going to be evaluating him for this season. And then as we find out what all of these young players are capable of, next year is when maybe I look more at the record. But for this year, I'm just not there yet. This, to me, is truly the start of this retool. And then we can look at the record down the road.
And maybe I was just misunderstanding. Like, I feel like this year is just a wash. Like, it's not going to get fired after this season if they don't make the playoffs. I think this year is what you said.
But we can evaluate his performance.
And that's why I feel like if you're making progress, that's where it feels like there's an evaluation. Like if you're an 85-point team, you've taken a step back with a better roster, and you will be evaluated off of that because something went wrong, unless injuries take place.
Sure.
Next year is that Davis Payne year to where it's, all right, if you didn't make the playoffs this year, but let's say you got to 94 points and you just missed out, what's the next step? Because at that point, you're talking about Thomas and Kyrou being 25, 26. You're talking about maybe a couple more years of Binnington and Parayko in their prime. And you're talking about exiting out of the entry-level contracts for guys like Jake Neighbors, for Philip Broberg, for Bolduc. Snuggerud's going to be starting off there. Next year is where the evaluation gets ramped up.
Yeah, I agree with that. But even then, I think it's weird to say because he's only on, I think, a 2-year deal.
Mm-hmm.
It's weird to say. To me, it's not till year 3 before you can truly evaluate Drew Bannister in wins and losses.
I think last year was year 1, though.
But last year, he had we all knew what that roster was. That roster wasn't very good, too inconsistent.
Yeah, but we'd all agree he outperformed what our expectations were.
Sure, I also think some of it last year was
I
think a lot of last year to get to expectations or exceed expectations was the new coach bump. All those guys in that locker room had to look at each other and go, holy crap, we just got Craig Berube, Stanley Cup champion, fired.
Yeah. Right.
That's what I think happened last year. But the reason I say that is because I think it's Broberg, Dvorsky, and then throw in the rest of the young guys. That's how you evaluate Drew Bannister under this current contract. Because to me, it's not about wins and losses in this 2-year little stretch of his, because those guys need time to develop. It's not going to be, Dvorsky's here for 20 games this season. All right, so next year he's the number 2 center and he's putting up 70 points, and now time for Bannister to win.
But if it is, Bannister wins.
Oh, well then, yeah.
Coach
Bannister
Jack
does.
Adams,
yeah,
let's go.
okay. But it's not going to be
like one of my believe it or nots before.
It's not going to be just as, okay, he's got these guys, they play for a year, and boom, here they go. It's going to be a slow progression. I should be able to look at year 1 and say, okay, we saw some strides from a Broberg. We saw some strides for a Bolduc if you see him. We saw another step for Jake Neighbors. Year 2, I should be able to say, okay, we saw a stride for Dvorsky. We saw another stride for Broberg. Now, once you get to, if he gets to year 3 is when it is, okay, now it's time to win. Now it's time to win, big boy. Steen's going to get you the pieces you need when he takes over. Now we can start to really evaluate you based on your point total.
Yeah, I think this year is an evaluation. Next year is... starts transition into I'm going to start evaluating whether or not this is going to lead to wins and losses, because eventually that's what this is supposed to be about. It's about player accumulation and talent accumulation, but eventually you got to win.
Yeah, I mean there's no more blaming Doug Armstrong. He put the team in a bad spot with the moves of past years. There's no more looking at Doug saying, well, Doug did this to the team. Now Doug has put together a actually competitive roster with depth in the minor leagues.
And young. And you've added youth, you've added speed, you've added some size down the middle. It's starting to look more like you would expect, not a contending team, but a competitive team to look like. The one other thing that I did want to ask you about, because there have been 2 new additions to this roster, 1 forward, 1 defenseman. That means that there will be likely 2 players that are not on the roster that, as of yesterday, we thought maybe would be. Who do you guys think is most at risk of not being around as often as we previously anticipated? Because I feel like on the defensive side, we're all going to agree it's probably Scott Perunovich.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say Perunovich and Krug. I don't think you see either of those players again as a Blue.
And we all thought that about Krug prior to this.
Yeah.
But now, I mean, there was still a part of me that was like, well, Krug might be back next year because Suter's gone if Perunovich doesn't pan out and if he's healthy. Now it feels...
thoughts on that.
But I mean, now it's... I mean, I realistically don't see how Torrey Krug puts on a Blues uniform again.
I agree.
Perunovich as well.
Side, who do you guys think ends up maybe getting pushed to the outside that, as of yesterday, if Holloway stayed in Edmonton, who do you think would have been in the lineup that is now not going to be?
Bolduc. I think Bolduc, there's no... In my opinion, there's no path for him to make this NHL roster in training camp because you're not putting him on this team as a 4th liner. And I mean, if he's put on the 4th line, who are you taking out?
I guess this would be the scenario. If Dvorsky doesn't make the roster and then you bumped Torpo down, he could be a 3rd line winger for you.
Maybe, but you've got to outplay Joseph, Texier, and Holloway for one of those spots. Because one of those 3 would have to become a extra forward, which would, I mean, easily...
What if Sonny's not ready?
If Sonny's not ready, then Bolduc's probably on this roster.
Yeah, that's the scenario that I'm looking at.
But
because
it also depends on how long Sonny's not ready for. Because if Sonny's not ready for a week, you could play Walker.
If Sonny's not ready, it's going to be a while, probably.
Maybe.
You would assume.
Yeah. I just... If you're Bolduc, what sucks with Holloway being here is you have to outperform that player who already has NHL reps under his belt. because Bolduc, in my opinion, is not a fourth liner. Joseph can move down to the fourth line. Right now, I've got him on your third line with Texier and Toropchenko on a fourth line. So, like, Bolduc is going to have to outperform a Dylan Holloway, a Brandon Saad to be on this NHL roster. And frankly, if I'm Bolduc, I'm already behind the 8 ball because the Blues probably believe it's much more beneficial for you to be playing as the top line player, power play, penalty kill 5-on-5 in the AHL than playing fourth line minutes in the NHL.
Roster math.
Yep.
It's just easier. It's easier to send him down to the AHL because you don't have to lose somebody.
Yep.
It's not a scenario where, like, waivers or just it's the easier thing to do. I tend to agree. I think it's probably going to be Bolduc that ends up missing out on opportunities because of
I'll tell you the one that's interesting is, do they go, we've already mentioned, my gut tells me they go 14 forwards and 7 defensemen. Do they decide to go 13 forwards and 8 defensemen? Because if they do, Tyler Tucker's on this team.
I just don't know if you're making roster decisions because of that, but I don't know. I know that I've been wrong about the way that they view him.
That's going to be one of the storylines with it, though.
He's Alex Ferrario. That's Tanner Hendrickson. I'm Brandon Kiley. We'll talk about this more with Jeremy Rutherford at 1 o'clock. Dylan Holloway has his press conference coming up at 1:15. You'll hear that all right here on 101 ESPN. But next, the junk drawer here on 101 ESPN. All right. Alex, T-Bone has been spending almost all of his free time lately playing NCAA football.
I was expecting bags under his eyes like those cartoons today.
Well, there is a new game that is going to be coming out soon that I think we might be spending our time. I don't know if you've seen this yet. I have not mentioned it to you previously. Backyard Sports video games franchise is officially coming back.
Shut up. Does that mean I can use what's his? Oh my God! What Pedro? Pablo.
Yep.
Does that mean I can? Oh my God! I can use Pablo. Yes.
The original Backyard Sports game was titled Backyard Baseball, and it was released in 1997. They are making a return. Yes. They're bringing this back. Alex, this to me, like NCAA football coming back was one thing. That's fantastic. This is almost on a different level entirely.
Yep.
We got to be a part of this.
I'm telling you, people always talk about like the invincibility of certain players in sports games, like Michael Vick and that Madden version. There is nobody better than Pablo in Backyard Baseball. This guy would just step to the plate and crush home runs every day of the week, T-Bone.
Was baseball your go-to?
Baseball was my go-to. Didn't they have a dodgeball one?
They had soccer, basketball, football, and hockey.
Okay. Yeah, no, baseball was my go-to, and then I think hockey was probably the second.
I did football and baseball. Those were my two backyard sports. Did you ever play the backyard sports games?
I had the football one because I recognize it, and then as I'm looking at images, I'm like, okay, yeah, I definitely have played one of these.
Dude, this is one of those games. Like sometimes I think we do too much with the remakes, movies especially. Mm-hmm. This is right up my alley. I needed this in my life.
They had certain characters that you'd go with, like in basketball. Do you remember Kenny?
Oh, yeah.
Kenny was the dude in the wheelchair in basketball, and oh, man, Kenny could ball. Kenny could ball, ladies and gentlemen.
He's Alex. That's T-Bone. I'm BK. We'll talk to Jeremy Rutherford about the latest Blues news coming up next here on 101 ESPN.
Alex Ferrario with you to talk about my friends out at Rhino Shield. If you own a business, if your exterior of your business needs a new look, then it's time to call Darren over at Rhino Shield. Plenty of businesses in the area have used Rhino Shield's incredible work. CMC Electric over in Maryville, Illinois. Metal Supermarkets out in O'Fallon, Illinois. We've also seen there's one in High Ridge out by me that has used Rhino Shield. It's a plaza. Cottleville Smiles, Chesterfield Amphitheater, all have used Rhino Shield's work. And why they use that is, one, the facelift that you get, but what you're getting also is a 25-year transferable warranty for the work that they do. 100% waterproofing on the product. It's deflect 90% of the UV rays. All of those, if you just use common paint, that's going to deteriorate over time. But Rhino Shield is able to withstand all of those elements. It's a 2 to 3 ceramic coating process, and it sticks to everything you've got. Brick, block, asbestos, aluminum, even handle metal roofing with Rhino Shield's work. So give Darren a call today. Tell him Alex Ferrario sent you and get the coating of a Rhino on the exterior of your business or your home. 877-25-RHINO, 877-25RHINO.com.
With Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Brandon Kiley. It's a big day for the St. Louis Blues, and that means Jeremy Rutherford has been very busy. You can read all of his great work over at The Athletic. You can follow him on Twitter at JP Rutherford. He joined Tim earlier today. He joins us now via the 101 ESPN hotline. JR, I know your time is valuable. We got Dylan Holloway in a little bit more than 10 minutes, so we'll start out with this. Thanks for the time, as always, my man. What was your level of surprise when you saw this morning that Edmonton opted not to match for Holloway or Broberg?
Yeah, pretty surprised. I know, Alex had talked about, you guys had talked about the opportunity that they might not match both and that the Blues could get both Broberg and Holloway. I'm being honest with you. I thought when Edmonton started to make some moves that they could have been in a situation where they were freeing up that cap space to match, even though I know they can go over 10% in the off season. But I just got off a news conference Zoom call with Stan Bowman there in Edmonton, and he sort of explained that they really rolled their sleeves up those first couple days and looked at all the different scenarios and what they could do. And when they got to a point where they made a decision that they weren't going to match both, that's when they went out and made those trades and acquired a couple young players that they think that can come in and help them out. So a lot of challenges with their salary cap and needing to sign Draisaitl and eventually Connor McDavid. So they decided to let these two go. And I think big picture, I'm a little bit surprised they let go, especially of Broberg.
Jer, how influential are these moves on the Blues timeline that Doug Armstrong has illustrated?
I think it comes at a great time for them. You get these players in at a great age, 23 and 22. I go back to my conversation with Tom Stillman. I think it was back in May or June, and he said, if you could get a couple young players who are in that 23-year age range, you might have to pay some money. They're not normally available, but if they're available, we're at least going to give it an effort. And I think that describes this situation to a T. And I think at some point, even though you still have guys like Torrey Krug on the roster, some veterans who have no trade clauses. At some point, you have to pivot. You have to get into the future and start bringing some of these young players in and get these guys on the ice who are going to play together for the next few years. And I think by a surprise, bringing in Broberg and Holloway into a group that already had 10 first-round players, 10 former first-round picks under the age of 25. Now it's 12 with these two into the system. I think it bodes well for what the Blues are trying to do here.
JR, it seems like Broberg is the real prize here for the Blues. When you've talked to people, whether it's around the league, around the Blues, whoever, what's your impression on what the Blues are getting in Broberg?
Yeah, we just talked to him for a few minutes, and, he pointed out what everybody says about him. Good skater. He likes playing defense. I think that we saw in the playoffs, Edmonton in the Stanley Cup final, he really started to blossom. And all the scuttlebutt I've heard from the writers that I talked to in Edmonton the past week, they said they felt like this guy was starting to come into his own. And I also just spoke to his agent, Darren Ferris, and he said part of the reason that Edmonton didn't want to pay him more is because of the situation they created themselves where they didn't play him. They didn't have him in the lineup. Then when they did, they played him on the right side. He said, so that's why we felt the number should be bigger for Broberg, and Edmonton didn't feel that way. And he said, well, that's because they didn't play him like they should have. It's more of a projection. So, yes, $4.58 million, that's an overpay for Broberg on a 2-year deal, but that's the price of plucking a guy out of an organization like the Blues just did. And then now you see how he does for the next 2 years. If you envision that he's going to be a good player, you could be paying him even more down the road, and you won't look back at that 4.5 and think that it was money that was wasted. So I think that's the scuttlebutt on Broberg right now.
JR, I know it's speculation, but when you look at Broberg's profile and what the Blues have been lacking really since Jay Bouwmeester and Alex Pietrangelo, what would you consider a win for Broberg to get to?
Yeah, I think in terms of coming in here, I think playing a second pair role with Justin Falk this upcoming season, and maybe he slides into that top pair. I just look at Nick Leddy and Colton Parayko, and they were pretty good last year, played the most 5-on-5 minutes of any pair in the entire league. But, hey, if it's not working and you swap those two and you put Broberg up in the top pair and, he plays his way into that style and then Leddy slides down. And then, as far as point-wise, I don't know what we're looking at yet with him. As far as power play time, I just don't know. I think coming in and being that tall, lanky guy that the Blues have kind of lacked outside of a Colton Parayko for the past several years, and a guy who, wants to defend is something that, I think that's what the Blues are hoping to get out of him initially.
By the way, I found this to be interesting. I saw this a little bit ago. Apparently, Broberg played 81 games in his career with the Oilers. Had he played 79, he would not have been eligible for an offer sheet. So playing 2 games at the end of this year ultimately cost them the asset of Broberg.
That's not good asset management.
Not great. Certainly not what you want.
Yeah. And let me add to that, guys. In talking to his agent, a couple details, and I'll have more in my article at The Athletic. But there were 3 teams, 2 others, including the Blues, that were serious about making an offer sheet to Philip Broberg. Of course, the Blues needed to have a second-round pick as part of the compensation, a second-round pick next year as part of the compensation if the Oilers were not to match. And in this situation, the Blues didn't have one. So they had to make the trade with the Pittsburgh Penguins to reacquire that second-round pick for next year to make this happen. His agent, Darren Ferris, told me at one point, even though Broberg was serious about joining the Blues and signing their offer sheet, he said there was a conversation where Doug Armstrong said, it doesn't look like we're going to be able to get the pick back. You might want to check with those 2 other teams and I guess move on. There's nothing else I can really tell you. But Ferris said, we'll hang on a little bit. Doug Armstrong got that pick back from the Pittsburgh Penguins, and they had the compensation. And then Broberg's camp said, let's do this thing. So without that pick, which at one point didn't look like it could happen, they wouldn't have been able to do this.
Jeremy Rutherford is our guest for just another minute or so here on 101 ESPN. Read his work, as he said, over at The Athletic and on Twitter at JP Rutherford. JR, final thing for you here. We're all very excited about this, and as of today, looks like a really brilliant move by Doug Armstrong. And I think the process, no matter what happens from here, was good. What's the risk, though? Because it's not a guarantee this is going to work for the Blues. In your mind, what is the risk of what the Blues decided to do here?
Well, the risk is 2 things. I think number one, it's finding out in a year that Philip Broberg wasn't the player that you thought he was, which I don't think that necessarily that's going to be the case. I'm just painting a picture that if it's not the case, now you're paying a guy $4.58 for the next 2 years, but it's a 2-year deal. It's not like it's a 5-6 year deal. So I think you could be pretty confident that a 23-year-old who played pretty good in the Stanley Cup final is going to be, worth decent money for the next couple of years. And then number 2, it could be the potential that you're going to see some offer sheets sent the Blues way in the next couple of years. What's the percentage chance of that? I'm not sure. I actually just asked Stan Bowman that question on the Zoom call with the Edmonton GM, and he said, listen, it's a business, and this is one of the mechanisms to acquire a player. And he said, I've got all the respect in the world for Doug Armstrong, and you got to separate the personal from the business side. So, is this a trend that we'll see because the Blues got a couple of good players? It could be, but I think if you're trying to look at any potential downside to what's happened here, it's finding out in a year that Jake Neighbors has received an offer sheet from another team that the Blues would probably want to match, but I think teams would make it tough to do.
Hey, JR, appreciate the time, man. We will certainly see you over on the Zoom for Dylan Holloway. He's going to be talking to the media in just about 5 minutes or so. People will be able to hear that right here on their home of the Blues, 101 ESPN. Great work over at The Athletic. We'll talk with you again next week, my friend.
Yep, sounds good, guys. Thanks.
That's Jeremy Rutherford joining us as he does each and every Tuesday here on BK and Ferrario. As I mentioned, we will hear from Dylan Holloway, the newest St. Louis Blues forward, coming over from Edmonton. He officially signed earlier today. Edmonton deciding not to match the offer sheet. Dylan Holloway next here on 101 ESPN. With Alex and T-Bone, I'm BK. Dylan Holloway expected to meet with the media here in just a moment. He's doing a Zoom call with the St. Louis Blues assembled media, and we will be able to hear from him on 101 ESPN here momentarily. Alex, we just talked to Jeremy Rutherford, and you asked him the question, or we asked him the question about the potential of there being some kind of retaliation or what the risk is with these kinds of moves. How significant do you view the risk associated with these moves?
I was just telling T-Bone this, that just looking at Puckpedia of where the Blues are at next year, as it stands prior to the salary cap going up, the Blues are going to have about $12 million in cap space available to them. And then with the cap going up, I mean, you could be talking about $15 million in cap space. Now, they do have 3 pending RFAs that, I mean, are of significance. Toropchenko, Jake Neighbors, and Joel Hofer. Sorry, Scott Perunovich, I'm not putting you in this conversation. But I don't think anybody's going to be going over the moon with Joel Hofer if he's not getting #1 playing minutes. Toropchenko, I mean, you're probably talking about maybe somebody going out there and offering him something, but I don't know if that's that significant of a loss to the Blues. The one you're talking about is Jake Neighbors. But if Jake Neighbors is a 30-goal scorer next season, then the Blues are going to pay him what he needs to pay with their cap space, because that dude is 22 years old, and nobody's, like, if we're talking what somebody would offer sheet Jake Neighbors to get him away from the Blues, I mean, that's like 3 first-round pick compensations to where the Blues couldn't match. And so, like, cool, let's discuss. But Jake Neighbors isn't going to have a problem getting re-signed. And then when you go beyond that, you're talking Dylan Holloway 2 years from now, Philip Broberg 2 years from now, and Texier 2 years from now. Like, you're not in a position where you're worried about somebody retaliating against you, because if somebody goes in and offers Jake Neighbors the same amount of money that Philip Broberg just got offered, the Blues will be like, cool, we'll match that if this dude's a 30-goal scorer again. So I'm not worried about retaliation. And frankly, there's only one team that would be retaliating, and it's the Edmonton Oilers, who are already in cap hell.
That, to me, is the important part. There's one team that cares about this. Nobody else around the league is mad at the Blues for taking away good players from a good team. Like, everybody else is like, great. The Edmonton Oilers have fewer young players that they can build around for the long haul. That's a good thing for most of the other contenders across the NHL. For those players to not be there and instead, just being honest, to be on a worse team here in St. Louis, right? So I don't think the Carolina Hurricanes are not retaliating by handing out an offer sheet to a St. Louis Blues RFA because the Blues handed out an offer sheet to 2 Edmonton Oilers young players. It's not happening. Now, that could happen, but it would be completely unassociated with this. It would be, hey, this is a really good player. We want him, and therefore we were going to do this no matter what, whether you guys got Broberg and Holloway or not. So that risk was there previously and continues to be there now. I think what you see here, the real risk to me is in what I asked to JR, which is Broberg doesn't become the player that you want him to be. If Broberg ends up, the Oilers were right, and he's more of a 6th or 7th defenseman, which I don't think is going to be the case. We saw him perform really well in the postseason, but maybe that was a mirage. If he ends up becoming a 3rd-pair defenseman that's just long and has an interesting game but never becomes more than that, that's the risk. Because then you have a $4.6 million defenseman who has RFA status that you're probably going to have to non-tender because you're not going to give him more than $4.6 million to be that long-term. And you ended up losing out on a 2nd-round pick and paid $9 million over the next 2 years to a guy that didn't amount to be what you thought he was going to be. That risk for this team, given where they're at right now, is nothing.
It's such a low risk.
It's such a low risk and such an unbelievably high reward that it's worth it to me to go down this path to find out what he can ultimately become. And that's why I asked the question, is because I don't view there as being much of a risk in this scenario. I think they took a very low-risk proposition, and normally when you take low-risk options, like in the stock market, for example, the reward's not all that high. Mm-hmm. The reward is unbelievably high with this.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. Like, go down the path that says he is only a 3rd-pair defenseman. That's what the 2-year deal was for. This is a clean wash. If they would have done a 4 or 5-year deal, this would be a lot more concerning. But
absolutely.
At the time that he becomes an RFA and you say, hey, you know what? Broberg did not pan into our top 4 guy. He's at best a 3rd-pair defenseman. By that time, Theo Lindstein might be NHL ready, and he might fall into that top 4 for you. And you're walking away with a clean wash of $4.5 million and saying, well, it didn't work out. We're right back to square one of finding another top left-handed defenseman. The reward is so much higher, and we're just talking about Broberg. Holloway's the other one that, like, let's say you don't get Philip Broberg as a top 4 defenseman and you're still searching. What if Holloway becomes a top 6 forward for you and guy who could score 25 goals? Now that creates another guy who, let's say Bolduc doesn't develop into the player that you thought. Now that makes Bolduc expendable to trade for a left-handed defenseman. That's why I think it's so critical that the Blues got both of these players, because they got both of these guys in a spot where they have a lot of cap flexibility, and they've got a ton of players that play the same level that Dylan Holloway does.
If I told you Broberg eventually becomes a solid yet unspectacular second pairing defenseman, like Scott Mayfield is a name that comes to mind for me. Like that.
I was thinking Carl Gunnarsson.
Sure. That level of player where nobody's thrilled about having him in their line, but he's a good player.
He's good. He gets you through.
Worth the money that you ended up paying for him. And then Holloway is like a 15 to 20 goal scorer, plays with a little bit of speed, but kind of floats in and out of games, not great defensively, and that's just ultimately what he becomes. How do you feel about that, if that's ultimately what you get out of this?
Fine. I mean, it was a risk, and it didn't pan out to what we thought we were going
that's
for.
Worth, in your opinion, second, third round pick, and then the $6 million for the next
unless that second and third round pick becomes Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl for the Edmonton Oilers.
But you don't know that.
No, you don't. But I mean, I'll place my bets on that not happening. I'm fine with this because, if anything, it gave me hope, which I think is important for a fan base that's trying to exit out of a retool. And worst case scenario is that happens. Well, now you're going back to where you were prior to this offer sheet and still developing a top 4 defenseman. If Holloway doesn't pan out to be anything for the Blues, I don't think it's any loss because they've got like 5 other guys that project to be top 6 wingers for this team moving forward. Broberg's the one that, it'll suck if he doesn't pan out to be it. But guess what? If they would have made the trade for Nicholas Hague, if they would have made the trade for Jacob Chikrin, if they would have just sat on their hands and waited for Theo Lindstein, we'd be in the same spot without the excitement or the hope.
314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line to get involved in the show. We are awaiting Dylan Holloway, who should be speaking to the media momentarily here on your home of the Blues, 101 ESPN. We did get this from the 314. Guys, he was the 8th overall pick. How bad could he truly be? The Oilers fans are all, you can have him after 81 games. Really? How bad could this possibly be? I think that's something to keep in mind, is that first-round picks bust. Like, sometimes it just doesn't work.
If you don't believe it, go look at Nail Yakupov's numbers.
Exactly.
Poor guy.
I don't think that's the case here. I think Oilers fans are salty. I think that's what's happening here. I think they are frustrated with a mishandling of this situation. I mean, I mentioned it to JR, Alex. If they would have played Broberg, who they clearly wanted in and out of the lineup, mostly out of the lineup over the last few seasons, 2 fewer games at the end of the season, just to asset management stuff. Mm-hmm. It's not as if they were like at risk of not making the postseason. They could have made that happen if they wanted to. 2 fewer games, they don't put themselves into the situation.
Yep.
Nobody else could have offer sheeted him.
Yeah.
And so they mismanaged this situation from start to finish.
Yeah, I got a good comp for after Holloway talks to kind of what the concern is and why things didn't work out for Edmonton and why this is a benefit for the Blues in terms of a Blues player.
Sounds like we do have Dylan Holloway, who's speaking with the media right now. We'll get Alex's comparison here momentarily. This is Dylan Holloway, newest Blues forward, now with the Blues after being with Edmonton previously.
For Dylan. Dylan, this is Matt DeFrance from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Can you just explain to us what your feelings are and what kind of the emotional toll has been the last week or so?
Yeah, I mean, definitely kind of a emotional roller coaster. That week was just kind of crazy. You don't know where you're going to end up. So, but yeah, it's definitely different. I'm really excited to join the Blues. I've heard nothing but good things about the organization, about the group of guys. I think it'll be a great opportunity for myself. And but while saying that, I have nothing against Edmonton either. It was a great time there too. I'm going to miss the guys, but excited for this opportunity for sure.
Dylan, this is Jeremy Rutherford from The Athletic. Talking to a few people, this offer sheet idea, the two of you kind of originated with Broberg. What was your mindset and what did it take for you to decide, yes, I want to do this?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much more that goes into it than people think. Like, people just think that you look at the numbers and you're like, oh, I'm going to take the better number or whatever. But for myself, I mean, we were trying to get a number with Edmonton and, we were just pretty far off in our negotiations, I'd say. And then with St. Louis too, I was able to talk to Doug Armstrong before I signed it. And he kind of gave me the vision of where St. Louis is going as a team. Just how they have such a good young group of a young core group. and then their goals for the next couple of years. So, I figured that I wasn't sure what was going to happen with the offer sheet. So when you sign it, they could get matched, it could not. But I figured that if either way, it would have been a good option for me. And I'm excited that I have an opportunity to play for the Blues now.
Hey, Dylan, Lou Korek from NHL.com. Were you willing to do this just for the fact of you feel like maybe there's would have been more opportunity for you to maybe move up a lineup elsewhere and get more responsibility, and that would have been tougher to do maybe in Edmonton just because of the firepower and star power that they have?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I definitely feel like I'm going to get more opportunity here in St. Louis. Yeah, like you said, Edmonton's got some pretty good star power up front, so it's going to be near impossible to move those guys kind of out of their spots. And I think for me, it's I don't know. I'd say it's a bittersweet pill to swallow, just because you're going to miss all the guys. That's a good relationship with the guys up there, but at the same time too, I'm excited for the opportunity. I'm excited to be part of this young group of guys here in St. Louis, and I'm excited for the opportunity.
Just following up on Jeremy's question before, it's kind of what was the communication like between you and Phil throughout this process?
Yeah, I talked to him a bit before. It's just a weird thing, like the offer sheet thing. It doesn't really happen often, so we're both pretty new to it. So. But yeah, I talked to him a bit before. After we signed it, I just said congratulations to him, because either way he was getting paid. So, it's always a good thing for him. And we're kind of talking throughout the whole week here, because we just didn't hear anything from anybody until 7 a.m. this morning, my time. So, but then I've been texting him a bit after, and it definitely feels better to be going somewhere with somebody that I know and I'm pretty close with. So, but yeah, I think that's about it for that one.
Dylan, last Tuesday when this announcement was made, I think everybody around the NHL, their jaws dropped. 2 offer sheets to 2 players from the same team. What were you doing? Like, as soon as it hit the internet and everybody reacted, did you see that reaction, and what were you thinking?
Yeah, I did see the reaction. I knew it was coming out at 7:30 in the morning. So 7:30 in the morning. So, I always work out in the morning, so I'm at the gym with a few of the guys, and I kind of gave them a heads up, like, hey, this is gonna happen, and a few of them didn't really understand. They're like, oh, okay, and then it kind of blew up a bit. So it was kind of the center of attention up here, and I was getting a bunch of mixed messages from fans on Instagram, but it is what it is. Edmonton's got passionate fans, and it's it's a kind of a crazy opportunity. Like you said, it doesn't happen often, but is an opportunity that I couldn't really pass up.
And where are you, if you don't mind me asking?
Just at home right now. I live in Bragg Creek, Alberta, just outside of Calgary. So,
what was that playoff experience like for you this year? And do you feel like just being a part of that is going to help you along in your career here?
Yeah, I think it'll help for sure. I mean, that playoff experience was incredible. We went on such a good run, and we were 2 shots away from winning the Stanley Cup. So, it's definitely, it was hard way to end it, but we were very proud of ourselves for just what we accomplished in that playoff run. And I think for me as a player, it allowed me to grow and kind of just gain a lot more confidence, playing in those big games, some crucial times, and, trying to produce a little bit here and there is it's definitely big for the confidence. And I'm just trying to build off that to start the next year.
Dylan, you mentioned talking to Doug Armstrong about the vision for the Blues. What was it about his vision that kind of sold it to you?
Yeah, I just think I like where his head was at. He was talking about how he wants to build a young core group of guys that kind of build up together. And I think now we got 10 first-round picks under the age of 25 or something. That was his goal, is to accumulate first-round picks. So, with the young core group of guys we got here, I think in the next couple of years we could be a very, very good team. And it's exciting to think about.
Do you have any personal connections to Blues players at all?
I just know Jake Neighbors a little bit. He's a Calgary guy. I played against him growing up a little bit. And, I've seen him, hung out with him a couple of times. So I just know he's a great guy. And I've actually been texting him this week. So I think he's pretty excited. And I'm excited to be on the same team as him.
What are the strengths to your game?
Strengths to my game, I'd say I'm a good skater. I'd say my skating is probably my biggest aspect. And then I like to play physical too, and then mixing skill and physicality. So I try and, play both types of games.
You know a lot more about Phillip than we do, but by all accounts, it seemed like he was really coming into his own, especially during the playoffs. What do you see in Phillip? Do you see a guy who projects well and is getting ready to become that type of player?
Yeah, I think for sure. I've always been a fan of Phillip's game. You know, he's just his raw abilities to be able to his size, his skating is unreal. Puck handling, shot, vision, everything. He's got all the tools, and I think he'll put it together really nice. And the playoffs for him definitely allowed him to gain more confidence, and a confident Broby is a very good player. So I'm excited to see what Broby can bring this year.
I know you said you had a good time in Edmonton and no, bad feelings. What do you think a game back in Edmonton is going to be like for you and Phillip next season?
Yeah, it'll definitely be interesting. Like I said before, they definitely have very passionate fans and a lot of diehard fans. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's some boos. But at the end of the day, I don't think the fans really understand the circumstances that we were put in. And but hopefully it's more of a warm welcome. I had nothing but good things to say about my time in Edmonton, but I could see them booing a little bit. But I think it'll be fun.
Any other questions, guys? All right. Well, thanks, Dylan, for joining us, buddy, and thanks.
That was Dylan Holloway, newest St. Louis Blues forward, who was speaking with the assembled media alongside Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson. I'm Brandon Kiley. First of all,
not just the assembled media, speaking to my heart, pulling on some heartstrings back here, ladies and gentlemen.
Good interview. Good interview to add to the roster. Alex, what did he say that stood out to you most?
I mean, are you kidding me? Big D told us that his expertise is speed and physicality.
I want you to never call him that again.
Big D? Oh, Mario. How many other guys on this team can I call Big D? There's
none,
literally none.
Him.
No, I will call him that. When we have media day and we beat the Blues with Big D, that will be the first thing I say.
Walk out of the room.
Fine by me. Fine by me. I got to build the repertoire now, and that's the way to do it. I mean, it's speed and physicality. Like, I told you, I heard him talk for 30 seconds, and I'm like, oh, Jake Neighbors.
Yeah.
And then he's like, oh, yeah, Jake Neighbors and I know each other. I'm like, oh, yeah, of course you do, Big D. But anyway, like what people, this guy is 6.
I'm going to drop kick you out of the studio.
Big D.
I'm going to turn your mic
or
off.
in your world, little D. 6'1", 220 pounds. I don't trust your drop kick to be effective. 6'1", 220 pounds. What was the one thing that Blues fans have been clamoring for the last 2 years? Get somebody who plays with physicality. Get somebody who can win a puck battle in the corner. And now that you put him into this lineup, he and Jake Neighbors are guys that I look at and like, yeah, they can win puck battles. Matthew Joseph, Alexei Toropchenko. These are all guys that have a knack for winning puck battles in the corners. And now you've put this guy who's 22 years old who says what I play with is speed and physicality. If he just would have said speed, that would be a lot more concerning. But to put the physicality presence in there, I don't just think what Doug Armstrong's trying to do is put together a roster of guys that are young. I think he's trying to put together a roster of guys that are young and have an identity. And like Bolduc, Neighbors, Holloway, Robert Thomas. You've got now an Alexei Toropchenko. You bring in a Jimmy Snuggerud. You bring in a Dvorsky. All of these guys, Matthew Joseph, all of these guys do one thing. They like to play physical. And that, to me, is something that this Blues team has been lacking since David Perron left.
And it's worth noting, physicality doesn't mean he's going to be hitting everything that he sees.
No.
It could be like the David Perron style of physical, where it's, hey, I'm going to be a physical presence on the puck. It's going to be difficult for you to get the puck off of my stick. That is the kind of physicality that the Blues have been lacking over the last couple of years at times. I'm excited to see that. We've also had a texter that's made this point a couple of times. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line. Guys, he also has a lot of playoff experience after what he was able to go through this last year. Absolutely. Him playing for Edmonton in their postseason run this season is meaningful, man. Yep. The guy ended up getting 25 games of playoff experience, was a +4 on the ice, averaged about 12 minutes a night. So it's not like he was a stalwart out there, but 25 games of postseason experience is a lot. And to be able to bring that into the mix with some of the other young guys, he brought up the fact that, hey, listen, they've got an idea of what they want this roster to be. It's building around a core group of young players, a core nucleus of young players. 10 first-round picks already were a part of it. Now you add in 2 more, so they've got 12 former first-round picks that could be a part of this roster. That's meaningful. Yep. And Dylan Holloway is now one piece of that puzzle as to what it's going to be down the road. Not all of these guys are going to be a part of the next Blues contender, but Holloway might be, and Broberg has a real chance to be. I love what Doug Armstrong did here. I thought it was super aggressive. I thought it was smart. I thought it was a low risk and an extremely high reward proposition. Kudos to the front office for going out there and making this happen.
Yeah, and real quick, because I know we got to get to a break here, but prior to Big D talking, I mentioned a comp for Philip Broberg and the position that he's in for people in Edmonton that are looking at people that are looking at this. Did you see that dodgeball skills, like backyard dodgeball out here? I think a lot of people in Edmonton view this as he's a guy that is never going to amount to anything. I think a lot of people felt the same way about Vince Dunn in St. Louis.
Sure.
Where they looked at it and it's like, cool, your first year was Stanley Cup potential, and we're like, wow, what can this guy actually hold? And then the next 2 years was like, no, he's not the guy. You got to go out and find somebody else. Then he goes to Seattle, and he gets to be the number 1 guy, and he looks like it. That's where I think Philip Broberg is. Philip Broberg has only averaged like 11 or 12 minutes of ice time. Dunn was averaging like 16 minutes of ice time. And then he goes to Seattle, and he's averaging 21, 22, 23 minutes. That's where I think Philip Broberg can be.
If we've learned anything here in St. Louis, it is that sometimes a fresh start, change of scenery, can be good for a player.
If only the Cardinals could believe that.
With Alex and T-Bone, I'm BK. Coming up next, we are going to get back to the St. Louis Cardinals. What does it say that they couldn't compete in this version of the National League? And there's some quotes that I want to read you from the Phillies owner. Just go ahead and compare them to what we hear from the Cardinals owners. Talk about that next here on 101 ESPN.
Alex Ferrario with you to talk about my friends out at Classic Air Care. Our guy Donnie Fandango came down into our office earlier today and was like, guys, my HVAC system just officially went out. And look, I'm sure there's other people that are feeling that same life. I was feeling that way 2 months ago where it went kaput middle of the hot summer, and it's thinking, what am I going to do now? Thank God I was a part of the maintenance agreement with Classic Air Care. Had them come out that Monday to take a look and walk through what we needed to do with our new HVAC system. And right now they've told me at Classic Air Care is the best time to buy an HVAC system. Look, nobody wants to do it, but if you're old, if your unit is old and you know you're going to have an upgrade, you want to do it now before the first of the new year, because from what Classic Air Care has been telling me, the refrigerant units are going to be going out of date, what they use now, and they're going to be using a new type of refrigerant for these HVAC systems, which is going to cost 15 to 20% more than what they are currently. So if you're in the market for a new HVAC system, give Classic Air Care a call today. Tell them Alex Ferrario sent you, or you can schedule a time to get them out online at classicaircare.com.
Terry Day Sports Center update brought to you by Saliga Heating and Cooling. The big news of the day, the St. Louis Blues have officially acquired defenseman Philip Broberg and forward Dylan Holloway from the Edmonton Oilers after the Oilers declined to match the offer sheets that the Blues signed them to. If you just missed it, we heard the introductory press conference for forward Dylan Holloway, and you can check that out on our podcast page, 101ESPN.com. And you can also check out the introductory press conference for defenseman Philip Broberg. This Sports Center update is brought to you by Saliga Heating and Cooling, an independent American Standard heating and air conditioning dealer.
With Alex and T-Bone on BK. So sometimes I see quotes from other teams and I say to myself, man, I sure do like the way that team operates.
Sometimes I see moves from other teams in the same city as the one team that I root for and think, man, that'd be nice.
Yeah, so yesterday I was reading a story. It was over in The Athletic, and the Phillies owner made himself available to the Philadelphia media. They had a bunch of former players that came through, and he was talking about, what the last 25 years has been like for the Phillies organization, what it's like to watch this team, and just a wide range of topics that came up in this conversation between Middleton and the Phillies media. Alex, I want to read you a couple of these quotes. And as I'm reading these, I want you to think about what would it sound like if the Cardinals ownership group was asked a similar question, was talking about the same kinds of things, okay? Mm-hmm. So first he starts by talking about how every game matters to him and how emotionally he's so invested in every pitch of every game, right? He said, every single at-bat matters to me. There's a mentality in baseball that's different from other sports. It's a long season. You can't get upset about what happened to you on a Tuesday night in July. Yeah, well, sometimes Tuesday nights in July determine season outcomes, playoff outcomes. Every single game matters to me a lot, and I react that way. But it's also a reason as to why I'm careful about not getting around to the players and coaches too much. That's Dave's job. He then continues. When asked about how important it is to provide a winner for the city of Philadelphia.
Ooh, this one's going to sting.
It's remarkable how special this city is as a fan base. It's why I keep telling everybody, it may be a privately held business that we own, but it's not a private organization. It's a very public organization. It's a stewardship. We have an obligation. We are accountable to the fans and to the city. If you don't approach it that way, you shouldn't be an owner, in my opinion. There's one more that I want to read to you.
Good. This one will sweeten the pot.
That one kind of stung.
Did it?
He was asked about having so many stars and having such a great team and the importance of capitalizing on this opportunity that's been presenting to them.
This one's going to hurt.
You just never know. Is Bryce Harper going to have an MVP year every year, or is it just going to be a really good year or a potential down year? That happens. So you have to strike while the iron's hot. And it's hot right now for us. The players and coaching staff have to understand that. They have to go after it really hard. And that's what I love about Dave Dombrowski. He understands that too. He has a great feel for when you have to step on the gas. End quote.
Man, if you could have just taken
3 quotes from the Phillies owner.
Just could have.
And every single one of them consecutively made me melt as I read it.
Not in the good way.
No.
Not like...
if I'm a Phillies fan, dude, and like, it's not just hot air that he's giving you. He's backing it up with what they have done as an organization. And I understand, I'm not asking the Cardinals to operate the way that the Phillies do, man. I'm really not. They can't. They're not in a top 5 market nationally. Like, they don't have the same revenue that that team has. I understand. It is different to operate in St. Louis than it is in Philadelphia. And yet, there are things that are mentioned in here that it's like, man, that's just not the way this team operates. Like, there is an aggressiveness in the way that they operate in Philadelphia when they have an opportunity to really win that I so desperately wish that the Cardinals had. The Cardinals had a window, man. They did. It was like 2021 to 2022. Maybe you could argue 2023, and it closed on them before they expected it to, but that was the window. And they didn't capitalize on it. They went right up against it and were like, not going to go all the way, though. Not going to quite step over that. And they decided not to. And What the Philadelphia Phillies are doing is, we've got a window, let's go.
Yep.
Sledgehammer to the fly right now.
Well, I mean, you could have taken out the name that he mentioned in Bryce Harper and inserted Paul Goldschmidt, Nolan Arenado, or Tyler O'Neill, and it would have perfectly applied to the Cardinals because you had an MVP-esque season from Tyler O'Neill, and guess what? That went away quick. You had back-to-back seasons where both Paul Goldschmidt and Nolan Arenado looked like two of the best players in baseball, including the MVP season that was 2022 and 2023, or 2022. And what did they do? They looked at it and they said, this is good enough. This is good enough to get us there. They didn't say, holy bleep, we've got Goldschmidt, Arenado, Tyler O'Neill, Dylan Carlson playing to the level we need them to. We've got incredible defense in our outfield. We've got a bullpen that seems to be pretty stacked for us in terms of the big four that T-Bone always talks about. And what'd they do? They said, we're good enough with KK and Carlos Martinez and John Gant and Adam Wainwright. That'll get us there. And, like, not to bring it back to the Blues, but remember the window that was like that 5-year window, and Doug was like, hey, this is it. And what did they do? They kept leaning into it. They kept leaning into it. Maybe so much so that they missed their window to trade guys away and get better returns. But they didn't. They leaned into it and they said, this is our last. They squeezed the juice as much as possible out of that 22 roster to get them to the second round against the Colorado Avalanche, and they just missed out. Meanwhile, the Cardinals said, good enough. This is good enough to get us to the playoffs. And then who knows? Philadelphia does not operate under the mindset of let's get to the playoffs and who knows what happens. It's let's get to the playoffs and make other teams worry about playing us.
Yeah, and I think the part for me is not only the part of missing out on a window, but he mentioned it, like just putting, you know, that Dave Dombrowski is going to put his foot to the pedal and they're going to just hit the gas and go. The problem for the Cardinals is, I don't want them to, they can't operate like the Philadelphia Phillies. Can they show urgency though? And I don't even mean that for like the years they're good. Like, look at last year. That team we knew, like, in the second month of the season was crumbling from within. There was no urgency to fix the roster. Look at this year. They still have two guys. Well, one. The other one's hurt somehow. They have two guys that are paid coaches that take up 2 roster spots, and they don't maximize the roster. Like, why is that a thing? Why do we have to constantly say, why are they not churning through the roster to try and see what sticks? That, for me, is like a lack of trying. You know, that's the one that frustrates me the most because, you know what, maybe Luke and Baker wouldn't have hit if he got up here. Who knows? Maybe Thomas J.C. would struggle when he got up here. I have no idea if that's the case, though, because they won't even bring them up for a shot.
It's really frustrating. What he said about it's a very public organization, it's a stewardship, and we have an obligation. We're accountable to the fans, to the city. If you don't approach it that way, you shouldn't be an owner, in my opinion. Stacking that against some of the quotes that came out earlier this year from the DeWitt family about tickets being down, ticket solds being down, and then that being something where that needs to now trickle down into the payroll potentially moving forward, and what that means, and how he like laughs at the idea that if people don't come to games, that'll stick it to the man. And like, man, just a very different way to operate. And I think the DeWitts, generally speaking, have been a really good ownership group here in St. Louis. But I do wonder, somebody on the text line said, guys, they had a lot of success. And now I do wonder if like it's harder to maintain that level of success when you have won multiple championships. I think there's probably some truth to that. I think you get a title and it changes your craving to get that title afterwards. I wish it wouldn't, though. Because it makes it harder than after to get another one.
Well, how about the comment, too, of, like, if you're not willing to invest in that, you shouldn't be an owner.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a pretty intense statement.
I agree with that, by the way. I don't think, and it's easy for me to say, I'm not an owner. I'm not spending billions of dollars of my own money on a team. But I don't think that you should approach a sports franchise the way that you would approach a Fortune 500 company. It's a different kind of investment. If you're investing in a sports franchise, you shouldn't have to like hemorrhage money every year. I'm not suggesting that, but it's not necessarily about turning this like massive profit on a year in, year out basis. You're doing this essentially as being a steward of a franchise.
Well, look down the street. You got a guy who basically said, like, we're not going to spend to the cap if it doesn't make sense. And what did they do? They're spending to the cap again this year.
It makes sense.
Yep.
But like if the Cardinals, there's money to be made, man. I promise you, they're doing all right over there. But there are times where it's like, hey, you could be a little bit more aggressive with the way that you go about some of these things. And I think the Phillies are a good example of that. The Braves are a good example of that. You can see teams across the league that do it. The Cubs are a terrible example of it. They're the opposite of what we're talking about here. Like they're doing what the Cardinals are doing. And I just
why they're with the Cardinals.
I think when you see organizations like this that approach it the way that they do, and then you see comments like this, it serves as just such a stark reminder of the difference in organizational philosophy and what it's going to take to get to where some of these organizations are. Man, for the first time in a long time, I don't know how the Cardinals get there. I don't know what their path is. I don't know what the hiring process needs to be. I don't know who they bring in. I don't know, man. It's a weird place to be. So coming up next, we'll hit the rewind here on 101 ESPN. With Alex Ferrario, I'm Brandon Kiley for our friends at Circus Sports in Illinois. Alex, people need to go over there today to get their NFL futures bets in. I told you earlier, I've got the Colts making the postseason, and if you want to make the same bet, you can do so on the Circus Sports app. Plus 150 are the odds. I like the Lions to win the Super Bowl. I like the Packers to win the Super Bowl. These are potential long shot bets. And my favorite bet on the year, I mentioned I like the Colts. I like Anthony Richardson. I like 30-1 to win the MVP going into this season. It's a long shot, but if he wins, you're going to win a bunch of money over there on Circa.
Take advantage of these tight money line splits. Take advantage of these futures bets that BK's talking about. You're bringing home the most money possible with Circa Sports Illinois. Plus, I love the fact that they don't limit anybody based off of their winnings. The customer service, you're actually speaking with people at Circa Sports, not robots. All of these factors play into why you need to download Circa Sports Illinois app today. If you or someone you know may have a problem with gambling, call 1-800-GAMBLER or text ILGAMB to 833-234.
All right, Doug Armstrong coming up at 2 o'clock, so we're going to get out of here as quickly as humanly possible. If you guys missed anything from today's show, check it out on the podcast page, 101ESPN.com, and the free 101 ESPN app is where you go to find it. It's all presented by Dobbs Tire and Auto Centers. Chris Kerber, the voice of the Blues, joins us yet tomorrow. We'll also have Broberg's agent on with us tomorrow. All of that, so much more tomorrow from 11 to 2. Fastlane coming up next. Doug Armstrong at the top of the hour here on 101 ESPN.